Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. And I'm really stoked to have Dave Weagle on this week. So thanks very much for your time, Dave. I know you're a busy man, and welcome to the Stay on Your Bike podcast.
Hey, thank you, Nigel, man. It's all my pleasure.
Oh, it's brilliant. I'm stoked you've come on. There's loads of things I want to ask you and talk about. But first of all, let's start off with where you grew up and what kind of stuff you're into as a kid and how you got into bikes. First of all, please, Dave.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in rural Massachusetts, which is in the northeast of the United States, kind of where that's the state that Boston is in.
Hmm.
So we were like maybe 40 miles, 50 miles west of Boston,
Okay.
literally in the middle of nowhere, 1,500 feet elevation up, big hilly kind of place, and only like 2 or 3 thousand people in the town when I grew up, so really small town.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I mean, like every other kid in I was born in 1975, so like every other kid in the 80s, got a BMX bike. It's like everyone's dream to get a bike. When I was like five, I got my first like 20-inch bike and started riding that thing, and way too big for me, but it's so funny, man, looking back. Like my parents found some home video recently, and it was like, we were at camping somewhere, and it was like some dirt pile, and it was just jumping it. And it's the funniest things, like ripping up on it and like did a big skid like up to the camera. It's like one of those coaster brake freaking ones. You just jack on the brake and rip around.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. So I don't know. I guess I don't know. That was kind of the, I guess, start of loving bikes. And I got I was like one of those kids that played like every single sport. I played everything. I was a big, I was a everybody, because of the kind of the miracle on ice thing that happened like in the '80 Olympics. Like I think the entire US was like super focused on hockey at that point, and especially in the Northeast, because Lake Placid is in New York, not super far from where we are or
Yeah.
where we grew up. And so like hockey was huge. So I was on skates when I was like 3 years old and playing
Wow.
hockey when I was four. um so that was like a huge part of my life through high school. And I mean, I played like two league teams plus a really high end high school, like a D1 high school program.
Wow.
Um,
Brilliant.
and That took a huge amount of time, but it also like forces you to get fit pretty quick, and like teach you fitness. Like you can't play if you're not like, if you're not like sprinting every day.
Sure. Yeah.
So, on the athletic side of stuff, that was a big part of my life, team sports and all that. And then I was also really into mechanical stuff, RC cars. I was a big part of my life growing up as a kid. Um, I was huge into that, and that was something I did like for myself, with my own money. I got a job when I was like 8 years old to pay for basically RC cars, paper route.
Yeah.
It was crazy. I've been working since I was 8. It's incredible.
Oh,
It's too much work.
yeah. It's retired, Dave.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, that was really that, growing up was wild. Like it was, nonstop. There was very little time for TV, very little time for, not a lot of video game time. It was just wrenching on stuff or, you know, playing sports, one of the two, or out on the bike ripping around the neighborhood, or who know, everywhere.
And what where did you get your interest from, mechanics and that kind of stuff? Was that something that you got from your parents or just something you were interested in?
I mean, I'm sure it's like, ingrained in my DNA somehow. I mean, I definitely I have uncles and had uncles and stuff that were mechanics and things like that. My grandfather's was pretty handy on my mother's side. My father is a pipe fitter, or was a pipe fitter, and a quite technical one at that. Like he was like designing and building and on site and stuff like that, like kind of build to suit stuff like power plants and crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So, stuff was always kind of around, but I think I mean, when I was four, when I was four, I took the head off of my father's lawnmower when he was at work.
No way.
'Cause I wanted to see what was inside the engine. Like just found some sockets, I guess, and just ripped the thing apart. And
Really?
he was pissed when he got home. I mean, believe me, I still remember that.
Yeah.
It must have been extreme because I still remember it. Uh,
That's
so
great.
my
Oh,
grandfather gave me an old Tecumseh engine, and I would just tear that thing apart. And then we wanted to build go-karts, and that's how we got into motocross bikes and all that stuff. It was just kind of interested in how stuff worked. So
brilliant. Yeah.
yeah.
And did you, like in your neighborhood, was there a lot of kids that rode bikes and dirt bikes and stuff, or
Oh
was
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah. Yeah, we were out in the woods, dude. So I mean, like my brother and I couldn't afford our own motocross bike until we were like literally we were in high school. Like we saved our money together and bought a bike together.
yeah,
But like everybody had bikes. Like this is awesome, actually. When we were in eighth grade, my buddies and I, we realized that you could buy like used mopeds for like $8, $10. So we would look in the want ads and get like any mopeds you possibly could.
uh-huh.
And we had this pit. Now it's a big development. Back then it was a pit, and we had this huge dirt pile, and we would just jump the freaking mopeds as
Really?
far as you possibly could. And the craziest thing, at the end of one summer, there was like a pile. I'm talking like 20 mopeds in a pile of just broken mopeds. Like the forks are broken off, the frames are bent, like wheels
Brilliant,
are
brilliant.
uh crazy
That
stuff, man. Stories you can't make shit like that up, man. I look back and I'm like, man, life is crazy. Like,
yeah, it was kind of more, I guess, a bit seemed more simple, didn't it? But I don't know if that's
yeah,
just because we were younger, and I guess um, those early days of doing that though, that's obviously gave you the foundations to where you ended up in the mountain bike world. All that
sure.
you did as a youngster, and then so where did you get you when did you get your first mountain bike then?
Well, so I look, so I wanted to. I'll back this up to say, like, I wanted to work in Formula One really bad as a kid.
Okay.
That was my path that I went to college. Like, I went to college basically to work in Formula One, and my whole schooling I personally tailored towards that. So
Okay.
started really working on composites early. Like I got a co-op job that was very specifically in vehicle composites manufacturing. I did a bunch of a huge amount of suspension work for vehicles, four-wheel vehicles. At that point in time, got a great tutor. Guy was awesome and really opened my eyes to what it was. So, um, and this is getting to the how I got into bikes part. But
And
I
so was that after you'd finished high school? Was that when you went into
when
college?
I was in high school, I knew what I wanted to do when I was like 7 years old. Like literally, when I was in second grade, I told my teacher like what I wanted to be, and I remember like her saying like that's not really a thing, and
No.
like and I told her I wanted to be a design engineer, which like is kind of crazy because it's really what I ended up, at least part of what I ended up doing. You can't just do that and survive. But like, I've definitely done a lot of industrial design, a huge amount of that stuff, and a lot of engineering. Like, so, but I wanted to work in F1. I wanted to work in the racing industry, and
Sorry,
I met
what
my now
why
wife.
F1? Because obviously in America you have your own, race series and stuff. Where did you get your interest in F1 from?
It's a great question. I don't really know. I mean, it wasn't super televised. I think it probably was just from like old model cars and stuff that look, the F1 cars just looked so cool. And like we watched Indy every year. Well, I watched the Indy series. I mean, dude, I watched every form of motor racing on TV. I'm
Okay.
talking like sprint cars all the way through. I watched everything. Like we
Yeah.
used to go to go to the local oval track and watch them live and stuff. And yeah, F1 was just super. It's probably because it was the fastest, most technically advanced. And like, keep in mind, growing up, like when I was a kid, like Williams was building the active suspension cars and stuff like that. And to me, that was just like, wow, like mind blowing. Like, basically, these guys made this, in my mind, was like this robot car, that could like read the freaking ground and, you
Yeah.
know, go as fast as possible, not understanding any of the mechanics behind it or whatever, like, 10, 11, whatever.
So,
So, I don't know. It was just super alluring and interesting. And I've always been very interested in complex problems,
mhm.
um, and trying to understand them. And like, it was kind of definitely just a lifelong learner. So, yeah, it was just a huge complex problem that seemed like absurd to me in my mind and wanted to understand it as best as possible. And yeah, I think I just kind of kept going down that path. And who knows, probably also got it in my mind. I was just like kind of super headstrong about it, probably, and kind of like, I'm just gonna do this. Like I'm gonna make this happen, like somehow.
That's great.
I don't know. So yeah, whatever. But I met my now wife. We've been together since 1997.
Wow.
And
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah, it's kind of hard to be together for like whatever 20 something years and have a 7-year old. It's almost physically impossible, but we did
Yeah.
it.
Brilliant.
But anyways, I decided I had done my due diligence and talked to a bunch of people that had worked in Formula One and worked in motorsports in Europe. And I had an interview through a guy named Nick Burns, who had connected me with McLaren. I had a, basically was ready to go and like, at least get in the door and see if I could get a job doing something. And the last minute, I kind of decided, you know what, this isn't for me. So I got a job working for, I had some friends that were my classmates who had worked in the Department of Defense at a company called Foster Miller and got me a job there. And while I was fucking around trying to learn like everything about composites and suspension and stuff, they were all off mountain biking because their
Right.
first co-op job, they all bought mountain bikes with their first, it was the first time they ever had money too. And so they all went and bought mountain bikes and they were like ripping around out,
Yeah.
riding bikes. And so they were like, you need to get a bike. Like, come on, let's go. So I got a bike and started. I bought a Santa Cruz. It was the first gen Superlight. I rode everything I could get my hands on back then and decided on that bike.
Uh-huh.
And then I like promptly broke that thing. Like, I mean, like a month and a half later, because I
Yeah.
was jumping it off of stupid, huge stuff. I
Yeah.
built it up as a slalom bike out of the gate with disc brakes and stuff. And yeah, anyways, that was the first one. My buddies dragged me into it. And like, I'll never forget, Nigel, the first day we went to this place, Linwoods, which was like straight up and down, a lot of drops, a lot of flat drops and stuff. And I just remember like swearing at those guys, being like, what the hell did you get me? Dude, this is ridiculous. Like, what are we doing? Like, I'm used to just hammering the throttle and just ripping up something. I'm like, I gotta pedal up this? Like, you kidding me? This
Yeah.
sucked. Like,
No way. Yeah, because
uh,
I guess round that area you've got some big hills and stuff, so you've got to
oh yeah.
get up there. Yeah.
And crazy steep punchy stuff, like almost no seated climbing. Like you're saddled down everywhere, just hammering, just like scratching and clawing, trying to get up, at
Yeah.
least
And
back then.
and so I guess with the way your mind works and everything you'd been doing at college and all your interests, I imagine getting that first bite, you must have thought, I can improve this thing.
No doubt. Which, you know what? So it's crazy, but man, it's unbelievable, Nigel, where we were then, and the
Mhm.
motivation, the things that motivated me to like kind of dive into that problem, and kind of where we are now. Because I feel like for a while, like the bike industry was, I feel like we've really gotten back to like the things that motivated me to get into it. So like, was I was buying all the magazines, like everything, just like all of us, like literally every freaking thing I could possibly consume, mountain bike related. I was, involved. I was in it.
Yeah.
And I remember we used to get Mountain Bike Action here in the States, and Specialized had some ads about it's like the FSR, it's awesome, and it'll make you a peanut butter sandwich, or it's all kinds of crazy claims, and it had like whatever their horse link, but it had like this straight line, and it was like vertical axle path, and I'm like, all right, well, like I don't know really shit about bike suspensions, and I don't really, we didn't have like a ton of like, linkage, kinematic linkage classes or anything in school. I think we had like one, everything I had dealt with was through vehicle, the vehicle dynamics side of things, which you
Mhm.
don't really need, kinematic stuff. But I do know from that one class that I took that straight line motion is like really hard to achieve, and really you need a complicated linkage to do it. So I knew just by looking at that thing that there's no way it could make a straight line. And I'm
So
like, all right, well, like if these guys are like one of the, supposedly the top companies, and they don't know what the hell their shit doing, like who does?
yeah.
I'm like, I gotta figure this out. And that's it. I started working on the problem, just trying to understand it. And dude, at that point, there were so many insane theories. And we're kind of back to that now, where like anybody can basically say anything, and it's
Yeah.
basically like no way to disprove it. It's just like, oh, I'll just say some crazy shit, and like that's now gospel because I wrote it on my Instagram
Yeah.
Instagram with 500,000 followers. Like,
Yeah.
like it was so hard to navigate, like again, consuming everything, reading everything, and in my mind everyone's an expert, like I'm just trying to learn, and it's like, dude, I got dragged down the it took me like really resetting and stepping back and being like, okay, like, well, I just got to start from the ground up, forget about everything I've read, forget about everything that you know
Mhm.
people have talked about, things that might make sense out of the from the very beginning, when you're starting to look at like the remember in the back in the day, like putting the pivot on the chain line was like a big one, pivot on the chain line, or like instant centers and stuff, and it's like none of that stuff is real,
Yeah.
not even close. But like, if you think about it, like first order innately as like, somebody who isn't like, doing this every day, like it passes the smell test. close enough, makes sense. So like it was so hard to like forget everything you thought you knew, and that's
Yeah.
it.
And what like in those so what year was that when you got the Santa Cruz, would you say?
98,
98.
somewhere it was early 98.
Yeah. So I guess at that time in the
Maybe 99, Nigel, somewhere in that range. It was pre
okay.
2000 for sure.
So around that era, you had the Intense M1, which
Yep.
was a bike that was thought to be a really good
Yep.
bike. I rode one of those in '99 for the first
Oh
time.
yeah.
Obviously, lots of other brands that did big brands, now that didn't have their own bikes. Rebadged in Intense.
Yeah.
You had like the Sun bikes, which is Max Commensal now.
Yep.
They had some crazy designs. There was quite a few what to us looked like crazy suspension designs from random sort of European companies that were
Yeah.
doing all the
Crazy.
World Cups. What what was the first sort of bike that you saw that you thought might work really well? Would you say, or
I'd say
was
the DHR2 probably. So that was the big three in the US were really the M1, the DHR, and Carpiel's Disco, which all of three, I had friends that had all of them. And, there was a lot of Balfas and stuff around where we were, but, that was like, I mean, I don't know. I remember the first time I rode a Balfa, high pivot Balfa, and I was like, all right, this thing does some cool stuff, but it also does some really wacky stuff.
sure.
Um, and like, but I think the DHR was really the best of the bunch at that time.
Okay.
It rode really well. It was probably too stiff, but it rode well. The M1s were great, and I think a big reason why they were great. You had one suspension setting that worked, right? It was basically the lowest setting, was the only one, the lowest BB height was the only one so we all put it in. But
Yeah.
the bike had a good amount of flex. Like it was a flexy bike in a good way, I think. And I
Yeah.
think like that's a big reason of like why it rode as well as it did compared to like, the Disco was a crazy bike. I
Mhm.
don't know if you ever rode one of those back in the day, but
Um,
crazy like inchworm when you're on the pedals. Like but it was cool because you could like manual that thing awesome because it would just like get into this like pocket and you'd be just, like in this like little pocket kind of.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
DHR was a machine for sure.
Okay. And then so from there, did you start thinking, I want to, have a job in the bike industry? How did that sort of first come about, or what was what were you
Yeah.
doing?
It's so at that point in time, like I was big into dirt jumping. Like I got huge into dirt jumping in the Boston area, being in school and stuff. Like it was just kind of what we would go do for fun.
Yeah,
And our trails, so it was kind of every weekend we're off, racing slalom and downhill. Like I'll borrow a downhill bike, so I'll borrow a buddy's M1. I would borrow my old buddy's old Foes Weasel, a 6-inch bike. Like my first DH bike I did on a borrowed Weasel with like a 4-inch fork, double
yeah,
crown 4-inch fork, crazy,
fine. Brilliant.
unreal. Uh, but we were big into dirt jumping, big into riding street, just in Boston, like literally just riding urban, jumping stair sets and jumping
Yeah,
off buildings and whatever, anything you could find to
yeah,
to jump off of,
yeah,
trying to grind rails and breaking your ankles, just like all kinds of stupid shit.
yeah,
So yeah, that's so kind of concurrently, like I decided I needed to the best trail, the best dirt jumps or the ones that I liked the most were kind of far out into the woods. They were like a mile into the woods. And like riding a 20-inch bike out there sucked, dude. Like it was just tread. It was painful.
yeah,
The bikes were so heavy back then, street bikes and dirt jumping bikes, they weighed a ton. And I was like, I'm gonna build a freaking 26-inch wheel dirt jumping bike. Like, I don't care. But I can ride enough cross country on it to get out to the trails and do a little bit of the trail loop and then go jump and add a little more loop and go back to the car.
yeah,
And that was like late 90s.
yeah,
Um, which is insane to like think of where that sport like went from there. But like, and kind of being on the ground floor of building like, 26-inch wheeled like jumping bikes. And then like what it is now is it's like unbelievable. Like,
yeah. But it was a big thing in that time, wasn't it? I remember basically well. for me anyway, I kind of had a downhill bike, and then I had like a jump bike we used to
Yeah.
call it, you know.
Yeah. It was basically us, Planet X, and like 24 bikes out of France. So the only like ones on the market.
Yeah,
And the Planet X's were just like a cross country bike out of Taiwan that was just, with a short seat tube. It was like those things were,
yeah,
but it was wild. It's wild. But so we started off, that was like the first bike that I designed, and we spent way too much time. But concurrently to that, um, that the race season in like, I want to say it was 2001, maybe 2001 on the East Coast, dude. It rained every freaking weekend.
yeah,
Dude, every weekend was a mud race.
yeah.
Every weekend.
Yeah,
And
I remember coming, I think 2001, I did I think that was the first year I got to do a few Norbers, and the ones on the East Coast were, yeah, it was chucking it down.
brutal. Brutal. And they used to, line the courses with like hay bales, and the hay would be in the race line, and like shit's everywhere. And like, dude, chain guides were a disaster. Like back then you had Mr. Dirts and MRPs, neither of which, if you even looked at with a little bit of mud, both of them would just lock up.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it locks up, you're like pounding rocks, and the fucking thing's all bent and mangled, and they're like, you're over, Dale. And I was like, this is stupid. And I literally went home after a frustrating race weekend at Plotica, where like me and like everybody I knew bent our chain guides. And I straight up just could not afford to spend another $200 on another MRP. I just couldn't keep buying them. I was out of money.
Yeah,
I was like, I got to build something that's gonna not clog up with mud and is gonna freaking keep the chain on. That's what I literally went to this kind of called the Nexus. It was like a rental machine shop, but I just knew the old guys that owned it, and they let me just go in there, and I just put the rotary table on the milling machine and started making stuff.
brilliant, brilliant.
And yeah, that became the first Evil guides, which then became E13, which kind of became every chain guide now. It's like
Yeah,
they're all what that was back then.
absolutely, yeah, yeah,
But it's crazy that like kids today have no understanding of like how shitty it was and how huge of a frustration like chain guides and drivetrain were, and like how massive of a thing it was to go from like literally something you had to deal with as the biggest annoyance ever every time you raced your bike to never having to think about it at
yeah,
all.
yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's. I think, yeah, like you say, I think the new generation, they just take that for granted, because most of the stuff you can get now, it just kind of works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, derailleurs and stuff still break and stuff like that, but chain guides, from what you designed, and the bikes are just so much better than they were in those early days, aren't they? And
Oh
last
yeah.
a lot
I mean,
better.
dude, even derailleurs, like you mentioned, I mean, derailleurs are like 1,000 times better than they used to be.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
really are. I mean, like I was pretty convinced that gearboxes would be the future, and I abandoned that course, a decade ago. I mean, like they don't. I'm sure there's probably a spot for them, but and derailleurs are pretty darn good bang for the buck. They're
Yeah.
pretty darn good.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, tell us a bit about how did that change, your course, and like, in the industry for sure. Like when you did that first E13 chain guide, it just blew up, didn't it?
Instantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we went from unknown. Well, so I'll back, Craig Hoyt, Skippy, you remember him? He was the Sunrise Santa Cruz manager, like for well, back in the day, and he's been around for a long time. He, I met him up at, I think it was at the Norba finals maybe in 2000 or so. Yeah, it must have been Norba finals in 2000. Um,
Was that at Mount
and
Snow?
yeah, it's Mount Snow. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's funny, man. It's that was at the point where I was like starting to kind of consider like actually doing. I had a great job, an unbelievable like dream job. And,
Right.
like I would still go back and work that job. Like it's an incredible, incredible job.
Uh-huh.
And so like it was a big deal for me to even consider like not doing that because it paid really well, and like I loved it, and it was challenging, and it was everything you would ever want. Um
And what were you
I
doing?
remember
What were you doing in that job, day to day sort of stuff?
what was I doing day to day was like special forces. It was DARPA stuff. Like it was basically robotics, advanced robotics for field deployable and advanced robotics stuff. So like battlefield robotics things, like, and some, mission specific field deployable technology stuff. Like it was really freaking cool
Wow.
and challenging. Like, and I worked with some unbelievable people. Like it just I was like the only person in 1,000 person company that didn't have a master's. I was literally the first non-master's hire, I think.
Oh, well, brilliant.
I just got lucky, got recruited in and brought in, and I loved it. It was amazing. But I remember, watching the old videos, and there was some video that had like it had like Todd LeDuc and Voorhees in it and stuff. And I remember Todd LeDuc talking about like it was his first year racing, like on this video. I can't remember what video it was, but anyways, I saw him at that national. I went and found him and I talked to him and I was like, dude, so like, was it worth it? Like, and he's like, this is the best thing I've ever done. He's like, it's been really hard, but like whatever. And like at that point, I had like my own dream of like I wanted to design and build my own downhill bike and race it on the World Cup, on the Norvis stuff, And at that point, World Cup wasn't quite, formed to what it is now, like,
Yeah.
um,
And just for some of the viewers that might not know, the Norba was a huge scene back then, wasn't it? A lot of the World Cup guys would do the World Cup, but they'd also come and race the Norba scene as well.
yeah, Norba was, I mean, massive back then. It was definitely the show for sure. I mean, and the courses were, I mean, they were just huge. Some of, especially I think like back to the old Solemn courses and stuff. I mean, they were
Mm,
pretty epic.
yeah.
Yeah, pretty. I
Yeah.
mean, awesome to ride. Awesome.
I'm really, I really think the sport misses those slalom tracks that
Yeah.
the Norbers had. Like if that was at World Cup, it's the ideal sport for TV and stuff.
Yep.
They get all TV again, and that's so much better than everything else that the filming. I think.
Yeah, and I think EC was right on too with four cross. I mean, I thought four cross was really, really rad.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I mean, yeah. So whoever's out there, needs to come back. Let's go. Let's bring it back.
yeah,
But yeah, so basically through Skippy, he had, he had seen the at that point it was the evil chain guide, right? It wasn't E13. E13 wasn't even a thing.
yeah. What?
Um,
Sorry, can I just ask you for everybody? Where did the evil name come from?
a buddy of mine, Paul Crowther, who was one of the original three founders of Evil, came up with it. Honestly, it was like I was like kind of not comfortable with it. Like I was like it was like a little too edgy for me, but he and my other buddy Ryan convinced, we kind of talked about it, and like he and Paul pulled up in like a night, like the old Burning Skull Evil like logo, like made it like literally overnight, and was there the next morning. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool, like.
Yeah,
So we kind of, we went with it, just roll with it. It was like not a lot of thought, kind of did it.
yeah, brilliant.
It's crazy. Yeah. I don't know. So like it's kind of funny. So that Skippy talked to Rob Roscop about putting the guides on the team bikes for 2001, I want to say, the first year of the V10,
Yeah, yeah,
the red V10, when Jordy was on the team, and it was like Jordy, Panazzo, Waddell,
yeah.
um, who else was on that team?
That's when they had like the light blue and sort of anodized looking.
Yeah, I think they had like a light blue, and then the team bikes were like a red bike, right? Or something like that, or can't
Can't,
remember.
I remember them being. They were on. They were on Manitou Dorado Forks, like the intense team I
Yeah,
rode for. I remember them having light blue frames, and they ran the
remember that.
intense tires as well.
It was
Um,
the second year. I don't remember. It could have been the second year.
yeah, I can't remember.
Anyways, they put it on, but talking to Rob, he was like, "Yeah, but I can't advertise these bikes. I can't like show the bikes in mountain bike action, like if it has the name Evil on it, like they won't put it in there." And
Ah,
so I was like, "All right, well, we'll just come up with a new brand, I guess." And so that's what we did. And it actually was pretty fortuitous because like E13 went completely bonkers in a span of like 3 years. It was like absurd. We were doing a couple $1 million worth of chain guides and shit. Like in 2 years, it was
wow,
crazy.
yeah,
And so like I kind of just mothballed Evil, like the dirt jumping stuff. Like we were still building like dirt jumping bikes and like, stuff like that.
yeah,
But like we just didn't have the time in the day to do it. Like it was just too much E13 stuff. Like it was too many. We never even like I don't know that we ever even were able to truly fulfill all of the order potential that we had. Just because I would double our manufacturing and then the orders would triple. And then it would triple the manufacturing and then the orders would go, 6 times. Like it was insane.
And
So
where did you get everything made? Was it always in the same place or was it different places?
so we had our own factory. So I started. So uh, I got when we started building. So first, let me back up a little bit. I got a lot of help with this from a few like totally unsung heroes. When I the first bash guards that I built, in the whole like building a thermoplastic bash guard, right? It was like kind of unheard of, and like I mean, dude, if I had a nickel for everybody that told me that was like the most dumbass idea ever. Like, right, I would have freaking retired before I even started. Like, so this I reached out to in central Massachusetts. There's a huge injection molding hub around Leominster, Massachusetts. Huge, like at the time one of the biggest in the world, and a lot of that stuff is offshore to China now, but like that was a massive USA injection molding hub, and a lot of injection molding technology and a lot of like stud injection molding guys like lived in that area and whatever. So I started calling just injection molding companies trying to like build of the bash guard stuff, and like that was a really hard product to build because like it's pretty hard to injection mold something of that much mass and
Yeah.
like get it to keep shape and everything. And I got hooked up with this dude named Dave Hellenius, who really took on the project, and like he's the one who really like made it work from like a manufacturing standpoint, and like was able to like really help us build a quality product that like could function the way that we want, didn't have like weld lines and stuff in it, knit lines that would crack right on. Like when MRP tried to knock us off, years later, they didn't have that, like, didn't have that experience, and everything broke because like they didn't understand the process and how to actually build it. But I was lucky enough to have, just this wealth of experience around me.
Mm.
And was able to draw on that and learn and kind of, work with them. So they came up with some really innovative processes to like help, just help make these things.
Yeah.
And on top of that, Dave happened to have a buddy and who had a small machine shop. So he and his buddies would go there and drink Heinekens and freaking machine bash guards on like one milling machine, like at nights for us. And
Brilliant.
then basically Dave got offered a job to become the president of like a really cool company that did like collapsible injection molding cores, like pins and stuff for like maybe like making threaded internal, features, or like snap ring grooves or something in a, internal boss, which is kind of hard to do injection molding wise. So when he got that offer, he was like, I gotta sell the, do you want to buy the shop? And I was like, screw it. So I just bought the whole shop and brought it under our, umbrella, and started expanding from there. And we had like 3 machines and like 5 or 6 people, like full-time manufacturing at that point,
Brilliant.
like 24 hours almost.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, everything was in house, like all our screen printing, all our hot print, like hot pad printing, and our hot stuff, hot stamping, all that stuff was in house. Like, and then when we did the later generations of chain guides, like all the like, you remember that like little feature where the thing like snapped around, you could snap the upper guide around. Like we installed all those like rivets and stuff, which is a special kind of engineered rivet that like it's not like a normal rivet, it's some crazy thing.
Yeah.
Like we did all of that stuff on our own lines, and so I built when we had that running. We then had a competitor, well, MRP, whatever, who cares? I mean, just call it, doesn't matter. They basically copied our stuff and then started, and they just would like overnight, we're like, we're going to sell it for half, like literally half on the OE. And we were like, okay, well, like this has essentially, and they were building everything in Asia. And we were like, okay, like, well, there's a zero, we can do it, but it will just keep the lights on. It'll be $0 profit. Like we can't sell OE product. So we had to then go to Asia. And I had already had a lot of Asia experience, through Iron Horse at that point. I'd already been doing that for a long time and all of that. So we brought I started basically mirrored our line in Asia. So we
Right.
did the exact same thing, but it was actually an opposite line so that
Yeah.
we could video conference and have like the opposites to opposites so that they could use their hands and like kind of see what each other was doing.
Yeah. I
And
see.
so, yeah, we ramped up in whole Asia line. Everything was built there. We even opened up a new tools. And so, yeah, that's how it went crazy, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you just touched on how did everything start for you with Iron Horse? Because obviously that was a big part of your
Yep.
pathway and what a lot of people will know you, essentially.
Yep. Yeah, that was all Saplavy. We used to ride a ton together. Like, East Coast is probably, just like being in the UK. Like, the racing scene is small. You know everybody, like, I mean, most of those guys are still, close friends, right? Like, I mean, we grew up together doing all the same stuff together, same jackassery, blowing shit up in the parking lot, like you name it, you
Yeah,
know, seeing who can jump their truck is the furthest,
yeah, yeah.
like, we spent a lot of time together. So, Todd, now Tara Saplavy, we traveled everywhere together over the years. And at that point in time, I would say early 2000. When did the profile bike come out? Do you remember?
Wow.
2003, 2002, 2002, something like that, maybe one, maybe
2001 rings a bell, but I'm guessing.
somewhere around there.
Yeah,
So Iron Horse, Cully had won that world championship for Iron Horse, like I don't know, 98 maybe or something like that.
yeah. But
Um,
the Iron Horse bike at the time that Cully rode was
Garbage.
who even designed that? Was that just a kind of off the shelf?
Yep. Straight out of the freaking catalog. I don't know if it was A Pro or it was like something horrible.
Yeah,
It was absolute garbage. And that was all of Iron Horse's bikes. So nobody on Iron Horse ever rode, like, when Lars was on, like Lars Tribute and like Ebbett and all those dudes were on there, like they were riding M1s. Everyone was on M1.
yeah.
And
No,
so during that time, like back in the discos and M1s, like there was only really like nobody, those bikes were really adjustable, but nobody knew how to adjust them. So like I got known for having a knack for, I mean, dude, if you think back to how bad those old freaking Belleville shocks were, like those things were insane just to even make it like not blow up, right? Like, so I
I,
got known for like being able to help people at least make some sense or get their suspension to be not complete shit. Like at least make it so you could get down the hill and be sort of in control.
yeah. I mean, even back, 2000, 2001. I remember like I'd have to, turn the rebound on my shock so it was fully slow at the start of a run. And by the time I got to the bottom, it was flipping flat out.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was insane. Oh my God, dude. The good old days.
Yeah. Imagine the kids doing that these days.
No way. They'd be building their own shocks too.
Yeah, yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, so I got known around the pits as like, when people had a problem, a lot of people would come to me and just ask questions. It's a community, so we're all working together, like we're all trying to survive getting down the hill. And usually winning meant you had like one crash,
Yeah,
like four.
yeah, 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 for
So,
sure.
um, when the Iron Horse team got on the profile bikes, those bikes were a nightmare out of the gate. And instantly those dudes were the floating brake arms were just collapsing, like right away, just literally freaking buckling and blowing apart.
And who designed the profile bike then?
I don't know. I mean, I just think it might have been a factor if they just didn't really have the opportunity to test them properly. I mean, they're out of Florida. It's not like they got like any mountains to really be able to send them off of, and they probably just, it was probably a little too early,
Yeah,
for the product. And it didn't, especially compared to an M1, which didn't really pedal that great on its own, but this thing pedaled way worse. Like it was just a slug. So dudes were instantly like, "Oh God, I'm going back to my broken M1. I don't even care." Like,
yeah.
um, and at that point, I had been deep into designing my own designing downhill bike for Evil,
Okay.
2 generations in. So the first one, like
Y-
I scrapped the first one, the Empire.
And this is before
Uh,
Weagle even came out with a bike at all.
No, we didn't build. Well, it built a bunch of parts, but then it was going to cost basically. We were building through that point in time. We were building through Da Vinci in Canada, which is how I got to know Eric Auger. I don't know if you know his name, but I've gotten to know him really well. Like I met him. He was one of the first people in the bike industry I met, like 2000. Frank
Yeah,
the welder, actually, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to as well. Backing that up, like he brought me around like Interbike 2000, my first Interbike, and introduced me to like literally everybody he knew,
yeah.
including Eric Auger and who I'm still close with, and
Uh-huh.
the guys in Joel Peters from who was Truvative then, but now Hive, who ended up buying E13. Like you know, Frank is an awesome dude. And he like really, really like helped me out a lot.
Mhm.
But um, yeah, I would have the evil the Empire bike, and we were building it, but I got a basically the machine shop that Da Vinci subcontracted to wanted 25K to finish all the CNC parts. And I
Right.
did not have that kind of money to put into the project. I was like, there's no way.
Yeah,
Like, can't build a $25,000 downhill bike prototype.
yeah.
Like, No way. Not in 1999,
Yeah,
2000, whatever the hell it was.
yeah,
And it was at that point in time where I had really kind of figured out started to understand like what was really happening, or at least I thought I understood what was happening with bicycle suspensions. At least had a better understanding than I guess I did before, and at least understood how important anti-squat was and how important, like what was going, how to calculate it. More importantly, which I think so few people still even really understand what's going on there.
go on.
Um, and the interplay between leverage ratios and dampers and kind of really what was going on there, which I had a lot of that, the calculative side I learned through the vehicle dynamics stuff on four wheels, but then applying it to two wheels and a binary system where you have a fork and a freaking, a rear suspension working together and counteracting each other and putting together kind of the basics of that. And so like that first bike kind of became obsolete as I started to say, like, all right, I understand now. What are we going to do with it? And that's how I kind of started on the DW Link path, which I didn't name, by the way. Saplavy named. I've
Right.
always been very uncomfortable with the fact that it's my initials, but that's what he basically went to market with it, like without even telling me.
No way.
Yeah, it's like I was waffling on the decision of what to call it, and he's like, too late. I already sent it to the artist.
Brilliant. But for everybody else, it's a fantastic name, you know?
Ah, I mean, I've come to terms with it over the years, but it does seem a little, I don't know, it
Sure.
tickles my modesty bone, I guess. But whatever, so that's where I started developing like what is the Sunday. I actually started developing that bike for Evil, and it was like half done when
Okay.
Todd basically said, hey, like we need something, like can you help us out? And I started talking to them, and they basically offered to pay for the entire patent portfolio and go into Europe, which was not even on my mindset. It was way more money than I could ever afford to do. Like never could have afforded it.
And
And
was
that
that
was
quite a big company then? Was it quite a big brand?
Well, so that's the crazy thing. So they were doing a couple $1 million of business. They were small, but they had this other branch called Worldwide Cycle that was doing like Toys R Us bikes and like Dick's Sporting Goods and Sport Chalet and Sport Check in Canada and stuff.
Mhm.
And so I ended up doing a lot of bike design for those guys for like their low end stuff.
Sure.
And I mean, Iron Horse Iron Horse and Worldwide Cycle went from like, I believe the number was like something like a $3 million or $4 million company to like a $50 million company in a
Wow.
span of a couple of years. It
Wow.
was incredible. We were doing like, this is a real number. I designed and we built 40,000 4-inch travel single pivot, like China built aluminum trail bikes one year, two
Wow.
factories,
1,000.
40,000. It was insane. I mean, like I literally, it's crazy. 2003, 2004, I was literally setting up factories like in China, in mainland China, like setting up the entire factory line, including you name everything, soup to nuts. Like not only that, like helping them source alloys. Like, I mean, the Chinese aluminum at that point in time was probably still not awesome, but it was absolute garbage back then. And
Right.
so like helping them source Australian aluminum or Japanese aluminum and kind of like talking through testing standards. And I mean, the ability of that for them to scale though, I mean, the money they had available was crazy. It
Wow.
was like unlimited funding. Like basically, I mean, I remember telling them like, you need to put a CNC machine like on the end of the line. And this is what I'm literally fighting the Taiwanese factories that were building our product, like fighting them to get to do this. They were like, we can do it without a CNC. I'm like, you can't. Just put a CNC on the end. We're going to machine these pivots. I know it's not the way you do it now. Chinese guys were like, okay, done. How many do you need?
Flipping heck. Crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I got in. That was a wild ride. You
Bet.
know, they say, whatever. Yeah, it was a wild ride. It definitely, yeah,
I
learned a
bet you
lot.
had to spend quite a bit of time over in China and stuff, did you?
Oh yeah, back in the early 2000s, I mean, I filled two passports,
Wow.
fully 100% full. Like get a new passport before your next one's due.
Wow.
Yeah,
Crazy.
that plus that and traveling to the World Cups. I mean, like I was on the road like the whole year basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you had this already had your DW design that you were going to do with Evil, and then what did Iron Horse then say? We need a new downhill bike. Was that at the time when Sean had started the Mad Cats team and they were riding that kind of
Yes.
M1 replica?
So I did that M1 replica in
Okay.
the interim.
Yeah.
Basically in the interim when Todd was like, we're going to get Rennie. like wanted to get Rennie, need a bike. And I mean, everyone knew Rennie. I mean, dude, Rennie was like kind of a scary prospect to try to design a bike for Rennie to ride.
It's got to be robust.
Very. Yeah, so I basically made like the most brick shit house bike that I could. And like
Yeah,
they already had like a catalog bike that Iron Horse was working with, and I couldn't change a lot. Like I could only change a few things. So I had to compromise a lot. And like so like they were just like it's awesome because like working with JC and Heimdall was great because like they were like able to like go and do the things that like we couldn't necessarily do at the factory level, but they would like kind of wink wink and like just kind of we're gonna move this pivot.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
go. You
So,
know? So we basically I basically made that thing work at, the expectation was basically we would make them work in the field to basically be like exactly where the best part of an M1 could be, or like if you were able to like cut an M1 and move the shock a little bit, like cut the tubes, like basically build the best possible M1 that we could with what we had.
yeah,
And that's it, and it worked. I mean, shit, Rennie won an overall that year.
yeah,
He also broke a bunch of stuff spectacularly.
yeah.
Amazing.
I can imagine.
My favorite one was I think it was the second year. Somebody told him Kovarik jumped that waterfall section up at Mount Snow at the top. You know, the one at the top, that huge rock.
Yeah.
And someone told him the Kovarik had jumped it, so he fucking sprinted it out. And this is before, dude, the morning before finals, and completely detonated his bike. And
Them
then,
two guys were nuts. To be fair, like there's some of the
oh,
stuff they did just in the parking lot and stuff before
oh,
races, and they'd always try and outdo each other. It was man.
yeah, I can't even imagine trying to jump that thing, Nigel. I don't even know where you jump from or
I,
where you land. I have no.
I remember. I remember the same. It must be an Aussie thing because I remember I was at Mount Snow, and it was before the waterfall. There was an open section, and there must have been like two natural sort
Yeah,
of things.
yeah.
And I remember, I don't remember who the kid was who jumped it. He was an American kid. He wasn't like a podium guy or
Was it
anything, but
Dave Hamill? Could have been Dave Hamill because he was absolutely crazy.
I don't know. This dude jumped this thing. It was massive, and then Mick Hanna tried it on his orange. Just the power Mick had. I mean, he's still
Oh,
not so
unbelievable.
much power now, but I remember him just coming in and just tagging it with his front wheel. Went over the bars, and I went down to see him, and he's like, "I think, yeah, man, I think I've broke my collarbone." And there was about 15 pieces of bone just
Oh,
stuck up. Like I could see him all under his skin. I'm like, "Yeah, I think you might have broke your collarbone." But some of the shit they were doing,
ah,
I mean, there's insane stuff now, but yeah, them some of those guys back then they must have been like the start of the crazy stuff that's happening now.
oh, they were unbelievable, man.
And the
Unbelievable.
bikes were so much smaller and not as capable as well, I guess.
Oh yeah, I mean at that point for sure the bikes weren't there. I mean, really to me, from my personal standpoint, and I mean I guess I'm jaded, but the first downhill bike that I rode that I was like, this thing is actually freaking legit was the Sunday. Like
Sure.
the first time I threw a leg over it, I was like, holy crap, like this is a different animal. Like this is actually working. Like high five to me. It was like
Yeah. Well, well, absolutely, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more shortly. But so How did you get from doing that the bike that was in the catalog, the sort of M1 style bike, to how did that come about? Then you
well, so
integrating it.
Sunday already existed on paper at that point.
Yeah,
So the whole bike, and like one of the big things was like being able to lower the bottom bracket. I mean, if you remember, bottom brackets were like sky high, like BB heights were sky high before that. And like because of designing a bike around having a chain guide that you could just smash into rocks and the ground and whatever. And also, if you remember too, back in the day, we were on 44 tooth chain rings mostly. Like even going to a 42 was like a big deal.
yeah.
And so like designing around a 36 or a 38, which compacted everything a lot, and a corn cob cassette, just a little 7 speed off of and running a Dura Ace or derailleur or something, road derailleur on the back. Like,
I've never heard it called a corn cob. This cassette.
really?
Yeah,
I don't know. So I always called it.
that's brilliant.
Well, like, yeah, just ripping cassettes apart, throwing away the freaking, throwing away the big ones, drilling off the rivets, and just like, all right, this is what I'm gonna run.
Yeah, yeah,
And like that stuff all like I mean, I lowered the bottom bracket height instantly, like 20 millimeters, which was like absurd because then I could lower the head tube, and obviously the bike was way slacker. And like the crazy thing about that bike, I always thought it was just funny, is like if you look at like the old Iron Horse catalogs, like the geometry in the catalog changes every year and the bike gets like longer, like lower and slacker, but we never changed the bike. It was the same bike. It was just too like I think the idea was that like it was too crazy sounding initially, like what the geometry really was. So they just like made it something that seemed more palatable to like the racers, and then just kind of like didn't want to tell people it was like a super slack head angle because people would freak out.
Yeah, it's the bike industry's funny like that, isn't it? Everybody's like looks at what everyone else is doing, and they don't want to go too
Yeah,
crazy on it because they think it might put people off buying. I used to quite oftenly. I used to when I rode and had bikes made at Intense. I used to ask the guys in the welding would they put my head angle on 2 degrees slacker than what Jeff was happy to do at the time. Um,
that's awesome.
yeah, but and what was the reason behind your DW link? Was that a combination of the leverage curve, the axle path? Was it so that you could lower the bottom bracket more on the bike and
It
it'll
was a
still work?
a big part of it. I mean, a huge part of it was being able to lower the BB height. And keep in mind, I was like initially really thinking about it in turn. I wanted a downhill bike you could just pedal, and there's no reason from a physics standpoint that you can't do that. Yet nobody had done it. I mean, our bikes just everything pedaled so poorly. It was just brutal.
Yeah,
And so like I understood like I finally created like for the first calculation to really figure out like how to design this stuff in a way that you could have something that was it felt good when you pedaled it and also had traction and all that stuff. And so that was like just kind of the first application. But it was pretty much, I said, kind of like jokingly like high-fiving myself. I was like, man, that was cool. Like, holy shit, this thing actually works. Like, there's always a doubt before you throw a leg over something. Like, it's all theory until you put it on the ground.
yeah,
And so I was like, holy shit, this thing actually pedals great. I was like riding it around cross country trails on Martha's Vineyard and stuff,
yeah,
like awesome. So yeah, I mean, like that was a huge deal to be able to like drop in that. Like, I mean, we just kept going lower and lower and lower, just kept testing the limits of it.
yeah,
But that made such a huge difference because you could lower the rider in between, especially with 26-inch wheels. So like, at that point we're above the axle center line, and I mean, like that just makes the bike more tippy. So like, I mean, 20 millimeters is a big deal.
yeah.
Like on a 26-inch wheel with a 29-inch wheel, it's maybe arguably not as huge of a difference because you're kind of below the axle center line and, the bike rides really differently.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it just was at that point, for that point in time, a wild improvement.
And what length cranks did you have at that point?
one, one, I was short crank guy. I mean, keep in mind I was a dirt jumper, so I was like 165s on everything.
Sure, right, yeah,
Yeah, I don't know that I ever had a bike with 175s on it.
no, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's. I mean, it's seems the norm now, but because I'd come from a BMX racing background, a long time before I did mountain biking, but I still, thought you needed like on your slalom bike for sure. I thought you needed 175 cranks, and I think the downhill bikes were 170, and then we went to 165s. But yeah, it's just where you've come from. Is
Yeah.
it thought process, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Uh,
funny, man. The other one I never really got hung up on was Q factor. Like everyone's always like, "Oh, you need like super narrow Q factor." And I remember having a conversation with dude Bastian from SRAM and Nico and like Nico Vuyo and talking about like I was like, okay, let's just do an experiment. We'll talk back in a couple weeks. Like, let's put like two pedal spacers between your pedals, push out your Q factor 3 millimeters, and come back. Tell me if it's really that bad. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it don't matter, bro.
yeah. No, and obviously, Sam Hill had already started riding for Iron Horse at that point. When
Yep,
when your first DW Iron Horse frame come out, did
yep.
at that point did you just kind of put the hold on the Evil downhill bike project? Then did you just
It
focus
was
on?
already dead at that point because I had to make a decision. I mean, like I said, concurrently E13 was going so crazy that I couldn't put the time into Evil. And it was just no, I just couldn't do it. And building with DaVinci was just becoming more difficult. Like it was just challenge building in Quebec and it's expensive and whatever. And I just had with the experience that I had in Asia at this point building, I was like, okay, like these factories can do some really impressive stuff. And
Mhm.
like, and I really had enjoyed going to Taiwan as well and getting to know the people and the culture and kind of, it was a full package. So I was like, to build frames competitively, we're going to do this. I can't do this in Canada anymore. I got to do it in Asia. And like to build the best stuff we possibly can to
Yeah.
realistically, not just from a pricing thing, but just literally from a quality standpoint.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, Evil at that point was mothball basically. Like we were building dirt jumping bikes because it was what we loved, and like we wanted to build them just to ride park and ride street and stuff, and just kind of kept doing that. But that was like low effort, and then yeah, E13 was like 98% of the day,
Sure.
and I had to make a decision, um, basically of to continue developing the Sunday around Rennie and how he was gonna ride it, or continue to design it around Sam. And this is before Worlds when he was on an intense junior Worlds where I think he won junior Worlds on an intense in
Yeah, that was
2000.
01.
Was it? No, it had to be later than that.
He won in
Whenever
01
that was, that's when I had to make the decision basically.
and 02. Yeah, and then his first year elite was 03.
Yeah,
Mm.
so it was around that point in time where like, all right, like we're might be getting this kid, and he rides like nobody else, like a totally different riding style, and like knew that like if I built the bike that I needed for Rennie, it would have been way too stiff for Sam to be able to drift that bike. It wouldn't have
Sure.
worked. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah.
Um, and so like had to basically make a decision to like build more lateral compliance into that bike specifically so that Sam could ride it the way that he rode it.
Uh-huh.
Um,
And how did you go about doing that? What was the
empirically. Built prototype, test empirically, all empirically. Built prototype, tested it, tried to run FEA, but it was too complicated. The tools weren't really there at that point in time, at least the ones, like the stuff I had access to. And I even tried to coerce a couple, buddies at Draper to like, run some sim on their stuff. And even then it was like kind of like, it wasn't quite as easy as it is today. Dynamic multi-body simulation is just it's come a long, long way in 20 something years.
yeah,
But
yeah.
back then, like trying to like analyze a full assembly was really freaking hard.
Mhm.
But that's why like upper links were not connected, and like why if you kind of think about the construction of that bike and what I'm saying now, like it all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And like, so you remember you ever if you're familiar with like how that bike looks, like, remember there's like three holes that are like through the chainstay yoke, like you're just drilled holes. I literally just kept drilling those out until it got better.
No
Just kept
way.
drilling them there.
Brilliant.
Literally on the side of the trail. Okay, let's go. How's it
No
feel?
way. Hey, awesome.
Yeah, whatever, however you get there, I guess. I mean, hell, Stever was building bikes with like 75 pivot holes on it. So I was like, there's got to be something. He was building pretty good bikes, like just kind of trying everything. I'm like, there's something to that,
Yeah,
It works.
I remember seeing a few M1s in this country at national rounds where people had they couldn't have set their bikes up any different than we did on the team. They had it in the highest position with the shock in the most crazy position. I was just thinking, how'd you ride that thing?
You did awesome, man. How'd you get down the hill? That's
Yeah.
crazy. That always amazed me, man. There's just the ways that the things that people are able to like ride and deal with. Like, there were these two kids that were way faster than me, way faster. And these two kids ran literally no rebound damping in their bikes at all. None. I'm talking full open. Like,
Well, did you, I mean, how much do you follow the current World Cup downhill?
very closely. Yeah.
Very I mean, I was chatting to Greg Minnar last year at Fort William, and we've had I'd been even though I'd been and watched quite a few events and I watch everything on the live feed and stuff. We hadn't been doing the World Cup for a few years with the team, and so the last time we were doing World Cup seriously was like 14, 15, around then when Sam was riding
Yeah.
for us. And Greg was explaining how he had to set his bike up last year, his Santa Cruz, when he was still on Santa Cruz, and how fast he had to have his rebound and how stiff the suspension was. And he said, you've basically just got to hold on to go that fast.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, surely you can't have to have it that fast, but it's something I haven't quite figured out at the moment
I mean,
because
that's the thing. Every bike is so different, you know, every like this is such a deep rabbit hole and
yeah,
like opens up. I think that the way that like most of us and myself included like try to communicate what we're doing, how we're tuning the bike isn't really aligned with like the reality of what is actually happening when we're tuning stuff. And in a lot of ways, that's why I have this, you know, $300,000 shock dyno behind me. Um, it's not because it's cool. I mean, it does look cool and it is, you know, a neat thing, but we can learn things about what's happening on the bike that are not immediately apparent in terms of just looking at some data acquisition trace or whatever. And the reality is like, you know, it's funny. People think about like talk about leverage ratio. Like I see it's so funny. Like I see all, you know, magazines and they're reviewing bikes and they're like, oh, here's this anti-squat curve and leverage ratio curve made out of a linkage program that's completely inaccurate and wrong. And like, but it's like people are like looking at that and be like, yeah, okay, cool. I know how that bike rides because I can see this picture. And like you cannot infer how that bike rides from freaking looking at that stuff. It's impossible.
mhm,
But I think people like get lost in the fact that like you think about it, they think about stuff. Oh, all right, I'm looking at this curve, this leverage curve. I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be in compression and it's going to stiffen up like this, and it's going to, you know, give me more support in the end. I don't think about what's happening on the rebound side at all.
mhm. Yeah,
They're thinking, oh, I'm going to make it more progressive and more progressive. It's going to make it more, you know, it's going to give me more support. It's going to be way better. Well, it also gives you more rebound.
yeah,
But now you got to open up your rebound to deal with it.
yeah,
And like there's all kinds of nuance that goes into this. And we're not even talking, we're just talking about the time domain. When we get into like the frequency domain and what happens at the same exact bump at two completely different frequencies, like, and the shock does something completely different. Like, and that's where you start getting really lost. And so it's funny, like what might work for one person. That's why I'm so like, when I was younger, I was like, oh, you know, this is wrong and this is right, you know, and said like I said earlier, like I thought I knew what I was doing. And then as I, you know, as I got older, like I got to the point of realizing like I know nothing. Like I've learned so much. I've got, you know, 10, 15 years of learning under my belt. And now I realize I know literally nothing. Like
yeah,
there's so much more that I don't understand, you
yeah,
know?
sure.
And like it's crazy, but like those are the things that really make the difference, and especially like the interplay of chassis stiffness, chassis, you know, like frequency, all that stuff plays in. It's wild. So like again, what Greg might need to set his bike up, you know, somebody else might need to do the exact opposite just because their chassis resonates at a different frequency or flexes differently or whatever, you know,
Yeah, for sure. And
wild.
just going back to the first, the Sunday and the DW link on there, because obviously, I'll ask you about this uh, a little bit later. Obviously, a very similar design is still on the World Cup circuit and doing incredibly well. But I always asked Sam, obviously when he rode for our team, because we were trying to get bikes to work the best they could for him.
Sure.
What's so good about his Iron Horse? Obviously, what he had loads of success on, um, and he was at his prime when he was, in my opinion, when he was riding the Sunday. He was young. He was incredibly talented. He brought this new riding sort of skill to the downhill World Cups that nobody else was doing. But I just always asked him what was, um, you know, so good about the bike, what he liked about the bike, and he could never really tell me.
You
Uh,
can't quantify it.
no, all he said was it wasn't like the plushest bike he's ever rode. It wasn't anything like spectacular feeling. He said it just didn't do anything weird, and it just rode, fast, and he was, because it didn't do anything weird to him. He was able to ride at his maximum potential on the bike, whereas other bikes have done like weird things, and then he's not comfortable riding at the speed he can ride. So I wanted to ask you to try and explain to me and the viewers, like how's that? How did that work? Do you think?
Well, I think first and foremost, I mean, there's always some element of luck. I mean, like, you know, you try your best in anything, you know, but you still need to kind of, you know, hit on the things you don't understand, right? I mean, that's with everything.
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, I'm sure for every, 5 things that I did well or did, I don't want to say well, but like 5 things that I did that were advantageous to that thing working, there were probably 5 other things I didn't even know that just kind of whatever happened.
Yeah.
But I would say focusing on at that point in time, like nobody was talking about frame stiffness or chassis flex or any of that kind of stuff. And like in the development process, just literally me running data acquisition on the bike. And I built my own data acquisition system and ran it back then. It was way before anybody was looking at that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I spent a bunch of time with that and not getting into the weeds and trying to look at full run data, just looking at really specific stuff and trying to understand how the bike was flexing and how that kind of felt with stuff. And at that point in time, like, whatever, I couldn't ride like Sam, but I mean, anybody can go fast in a straight line and hit some rocks, like whatever. I could do that pretty damn well. And I could send it into one corner and feel what the bike felt like. I couldn't, do it all the way down the hill, but I could hit one hard enough,
Yeah.
like, so, I just spent the time on it and just tried to get it to point. I had a lot of friends that rode the bike and just kind of like talked to them and got honest feedback and tried to trust, feedback is really hard to give and internalize because you need to spend some amount of energy like thinking and remembering about what the hell is happening, right? You've done this for a ton of your career. And so you have to either back it off or memorize the section so that you can either like do it blind, basically blind. So you're thinking about what you're feeling and you just know you're how to hit that thing. You've already done it 1,000 times. You know what it feels like. Or you go slower and you think about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just kind of, like memorize some sections and fucking hit them as fast as I possibly could and
Yeah.
try to think about what was going on and start adjusting from there. And then, you hand it over to the guys and let them go and let them tune. And I think it was really helpful having, one of the things that that I did early on that worked out really well is I had met with both Progressive and Fox and had great relationships with them, built great relationships with them over the years. But we used their product in a way that nobody else was using it. So the fifth element damper, like we weren't using the CVT valve. We are using it the way that Charlie Kernot, who designed all that technology, originally planned it, which was like a bottom-up bumper for off-road shocks.
Yeah.
And so that's why the Sunday leverage ratio curves looked like the way that they were. They weren't, maybe to back this up to say that like I don't typically develop product like starting off with some curves. So I think they're freaking irrelevant anyways. Like they're just some driven dimension that gets to where you need to be,
Yeah.
and they work in conjunction with 10 other things. So like, somehow they're just a singular representation of what the hell's happening with the product. It's just not reality. So kind of backing into those though, it required a leverage ratio curve that when you look at it in a vacuum, it just is like, oh, that's kind of weird. It's like kind of flat in the end. And why isn't it more progressive? It's because the shock was doing the work
Yeah.
and adding the end bottom out and adding that end rebound to deal with the end bottom out because that's what the design of that shock actually did. And then when Fox went to the DHX, it was basically a Kernot as well. And so we did the same thing. Biggest air volume. Like we were literally taking the cap off, unscrewing the cap off the shock and like unscrewing that adjuster like 2 more turns out, like literally to get more volume in the chain in the IFP.
Sure.
So like I'd say like all together, like all that stuff, the whole package together is what made that bike kind of predictable. The geometry was the BB was way lower than anything at the time.
Yeah.
Like which made a huge difference. But it wasn't like just the BB, like all the contact points were moved in relation to that as well. That's
Yeah.
another thing for me. Like I don't look at front centers. Like I think seat tube angles need to go away in the bike industry. It's the most misleading dimension possible. Like I don't even know why people are talking about it. Like reach and stack are kind of semi useless as well. Like again, they don't really tell the story about what's happening unless you're looking at the exact and like this may come as a shock, but I hope not. But like really didn't care what unladen geometry looked like either. Like I don't care what the thing looks like sitting on the ground, fully extended, like just sitting there. Like okay, cool to know, but
Yeah.
I don't know, like I never rode my bike fully extended, like standing on the ground,
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
at least not for more than a millisecond.
No, 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 you correct, correct.
So, like, I mean, I think it's just the whole approach. Keep in mind, Nigel, I came from outside of the bike industry. Like, I didn't work in a bike shop. I didn't know anything other than what I read in magazines about downhill bikes. And, I started off dirt jumping, which is all feel. It's
Yeah.
all feel, right? And I just kind of did everything by feel and tried to put quantification, put numbers to it, started measuring, trying to put like a measured value to like what I was actually feeling, and
Mhm.
then work from there to try to make something that works, you know?
Well, I mean, I imagine, obviously before go on, the success Sam had on the Iron Horse was incredible on the Sunday. I mean, he just at that time he just brought a new energy and just an incredible spectacle to the
Oh
the
yeah.
world of downhill racing, and obviously he'd done that on the bike that you designed, and then basically every other kid had wanted an Iron Horse Sunday, didn't they? I mean, that
Yeah.
must have, what
You
did that
know,
do to Iron Horse? I mean, was that still a tiny proportion of the sales with what you were saying? They were selling all these
yeah.
bikes. Was it just a
Yeah, I'll say too, like the team, like, and the team was awesome. And, Bryn Atkinson included as well in there, and Sabrina Janier, who I love. She was just the best, freaking such an awesome person. Um, And it was just a fantastic group of people. But like beyond that, like the privateers were really the ones who like pushed that bike. Like, and I would say that bike was like one that like privateers could get on. First off, it was robust. It worked. It didn't freaking fall apart. Like pretty much just it was light for the time, like really lightweight. And the privateers are the ones who really like made that like really pushed that bike and like really kind of propelled it. You know what I mean? I think back to even like Wentz and Sven and Lars Sternberg, like the Honda team, right? Like those dudes were awesome and like super, super like they like really talked to a lot of people about that bike and how much they loved it. And like it was like everybody was just a buzz about that thing. It was just so different, you know? And I think it was just one of the first things that like in our culture, like one of the first bikes that like could be excited about, Like that was just like, I don't know, just kind of did everything that you wanted it to without being like a nightmare from a maintenance or like, every other standpoint, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of rad. You could put it in your car dirty and get it out the next day and the next week and race it again and still going.
Yeah.
And there's probably something too that like almost everyone ever sold probably had an E13 on it. So nobody had to like the annoyances of chain guys and just weren't getting frustrated with the thing too as well. I'm sure there's some like psychological component of that, there.
Yeah.
Like because that was about the point in time too where we were like starting to not have to deal with that crap anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And wheels were getting better too, right? At that point in time, like wheels were definitely like that was a really great point in time for wheels. Wheels were starting to get to the point where they weren't just shitting out. I think we'd all realized that like you could run like you didn't run like big 14 gauge spokes. You were on or like 13s or 12s. You were running like triple butted like super thin spokes to try to get the wheel to flex right. And
Yeah.
so there was a lot of stuff I think kind of that went together to make that like a really great experience. So that translated to Iron Horse. I believe the biggest year they sold like 1,100 or 1,200 bikes. Tara Saplady would know these numbers probably off the top of her head at this point, but I don't remember exactly. But I know that at one point Iron Horse was buying more boxers than the rest of the bike industry.
It was, what was
They
it?
were buying more boxers than the rest of the industry, as far as I remember. And like I think like it was like a 10-1 Santa versus Santa Cruz in terms of bikes or something like that, maybe more than that,
Yeah. Yeah. I,
which was great, but insignificant dollars wise.
okay.
But that program and the success we had there, like I watched the guys at at Worldwide Cycle really sell that to like the sporting goods companies and be like, hey, we can make this guy here design that bike and he can design, this $50 freaking, whatever you'll sell in your store for $400, suspension bike. Like, would you like to sign here, sir? You know?
Yeah. And
So yeah.
and what? So what happened? What happened to Iron Horse, and how did that affect y- you know
Um,
your
it's
business?
pretty simple. uh Dude that ran the company and I think his COO, they got greedy. They embezzled a bunch of money from the company. I mean, it's a public story. Myself, they owed me a ton of money that they just didn't pay me. And that was a big problem with that company. They just didn't pay anybody.
Were
They
you
owed a
like
bunch of vendors money.
were you
Huh?
kind of contracting to them for your designs,
Yeah.
or yeah,
Yeah, just doing work too, like literally just physically like working hours.
yeah,
I mean, like traveling to Asia for free isn't really a thing. like for anybody. Like if I was like, Nigel, today, will you go to China for me for 2 weeks?
Yeah,
He'd be like,
sure.
okay, sure. We hop on the plane.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And this is old school China too. It's not like nice China. This is like your guy you're getting like a dude with an M16 is greeting you at the border, or a AK-47, I mean.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So yeah, they imploded. Several of their vendors, suppliers, like basically tried to get their money out of them and force them into bankruptcy, Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which then ended up the scale of the embezzlement really came out at that point, which was like in the millions. And then um whatever. I mean, nobody ever got anything out of it. Like basically got sold to Pacific. The brand got sold to Pacific, and
Right.
nothing really ever came of it. It's just too bad. I'll say I had given them in 2005,
Mhm.
first year of the Airboxer. I don't know what year that was. Is it 05?
I can't remember that. I can't remember. What,
05 or 06, whatever it was.
yeah,
I had designed a bike that was like kind of like what I thought would be like kind of the next generation, kind of modern trail bike. It was a long travel trail bike called the Type 6. They never built it. Well, they built it, but they never sold it.
Iron Horse.
Yeah, it was a 150 millimeter travel, 150 millimeter fork,
Mm.
and it was supposed to launch. It was supposed to launch, I believe, at Sea Otter 05. I think it could be 06, but I can't really remember exactly. Um, Iron Horse had no quality control staff. Like they were literally relying on me and Saplavy to do everything. And I mean, like I didn't have the time for that shit. Like, I mean, like I basically gave them, I was like, listen, we need to get anybody, a person that will just go to the factory and like the quality, the QC, the factories were rough, bro. The
Right.
factories were hard. Like they would send almost anything. Like, I mean, dude, head angles would be off by like a degree and a half, and like the head tube's like twisted, and they're like, okay, it's good enough for test for a sample. Like, what are you talking, dude? Do you understand what we're doing with these things? Like, gonna die, like
No,
literally gonna be dead.
that's flipping heck.
Need to show you a video of what we're using these things for. Like, I don't think you're getting it, you
And they
know?
just didn't have a clue, like,
Yeah. And so, that bike was rad. I rode it. I still have the bike, and I have but if you remember that prototype short travel downhill bike that we brought that I built for Sam, it was called the SSO. It was the Sam Sea Otter, and it
okay,
was that bike with like it was a Sunday
yeah,
but from a dynamic, like from a ride feel standpoint, so the geometry doesn't like directly, it's not like a scaled down Sunday, like the geometry looks different, but from a ride feel standpoint, it was a 6-inch travel Sunday.
okay. And
And
well, that's really funny story. And what year would that have been then?
it had to be '05. So this is crazy. I had worked with Sander and Bubar. Sander Rigney and Jeremiah Bubar were at, with our Rock Shox guys for all of us, right? At that
Yeah,
time. And so they agreed to build like a prototype short travel airboxer, which they built that was color matched to the bike.
brilliant. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to show this thing at Sea Otter. Factory freaking sends this thing, of course, last minute, no QC staff, of course, so everything's all delayed. It finally shows up, absolute disaster. Stuff's everywhere, unfixable. Like I literally bought reamers. I still have the reamers in this tool chest about 10 feet from me. Like try to fix this thing. It was like impossible to fix. And we went to Sea Otter. Rock Shox is like, well, we built this fork. Santa Cruz had, unbeknownst to anybody, brought the Nomad there. Rennie was riding for Santa Cruz. It was his first year. They put the airboxer that I had requisitioned on Rennie's bike, and he won Sea Otter on the
Oh,
damn. And I was just like, this is brutal.
wow.
Like, you gotta be kidding. And I was like, listen, I gave Iron Horse a ultimatum. I was like, listen, you got to get one. I'll give you a year. We need a year. One QC staff. One. Just one.
No way.
And they couldn't do it. They didn't do it. Wouldn't do it. The like leadership just couldn't do it for whatever reason. Didn't do it. Still didn't understand why it was valuable. And I was at that point like realizing that like from a suspension standpoint, like really had something that nobody else in the industry had, and was able to replicate like across an entire product line of of different travels, different disciplines, etc. Like replicate that success like over and over. And I'm watching other companies just flail and build like it's all kinds of crazy stuff in crazy directions. And one thing might work well, another thing is a complete turd. And I was like, man, there's something here. Like there's a business, or at least something. And I had people at that point, like multiple companies banging down my door to be like, will you work with us? Will you work with us? Will you work? And I was like, no, I can't. And I was finally like, I'm gonna do it. Like,
And
kind of move on.
did you own the patent for the DW Link at that point, or did Iron Horse
Yep,
own?
I
So
owned everything.
so if you moved away from Iron Horse, did they have to stop producing a bike with your linkage system on?
Yeah, but not only that, Nigel, they didn't have any staff to do anything. They couldn't produce anything. Like I was doing all the work.
Yeah,
So I mean, between Saplavia and I, like we're doing literally everything.
right.
So like they couldn't do it. Like it wasn't even, it didn't matter. And I mean, I'll say too, like, and I would say this is almost across the boards that like the patents are awesome. And there's a system, that we are beholden to that like the government's set up that how you, whatever, the value, what patents do. And how, I don't necessarily agree with it or like it, but it is what it is. I didn't invent the system, you just got to work within it.
Yeah,
But like at that point, the trademarks and what the work that I'd done under the patents had really like become the value. I would say a huge part of the value. Like people don't think about a DW link and think about some patent. They think about what that thing feels like and what it means to them when they ride it.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and I mean, yeah, there is value. There's the ability to protect that that IP, but it's I don't know. To me, it's just not really like the I don't know. It's not my focus. It's not something I super enjoy or any of that stuff. Like it's just something you got to deal with if you're someone who's developing stuff, developing products and technology. So like, yeah, they could have built something with the patent, but I mean, I don't know if they would have been able to make it work well.
mm,
It's why, there's a whole bunch of different bikes over the years that have kind of looked like a DW Link, but haven't quite lived up to the billing.
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
I mean,
and
it just,
I mean, yeah, sorry, just going back to that bike that you designed for Sam and that shortened boxer. It made me laugh that um I did a similar project with Jeff Stieber at Intense. Like I remember racing Sea Otter on like an Uzi DH, and then
yeah,
the year after I raced on like my um Taser slalom bike, and I was literally the I think I got the same exact result on both bikes. Uh,
that's crazy.
and then I was at the factory one day, and Jeff was saying, what would be your ideal bike for Sea Otter? So I said, well, basically, I think they must have had the SOCOM at the time, and
Yeah,
I said basically a 6-inch travel version of the SOCOM downhill bike would be ideal, which is
yeah.
like your bike. It's basically an enduro bike, isn't it?
Yeah, it was just an enduro bike with an insanely low BB height and a really low head tube because like, the BB was so low.
Yeah,
It was basically an enduro bike that you couldn't pedal up a hill.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I remember trying to put, a small. Obviously, there was no. It was just before dropper posts. It was um, just I was trying to put a smaller um, chain ring on the front and stuff, and basically I was going up to a place in California called Idlewild, which is
And
a
I've heard
place
of it.
where a lot of guys go riding and testing, but there's quite a lot of pedaling there, as well as downhilling. So that was a perfect bike, which is you know similar to an enduro bike, I guess, of today. But it's just funny that so much work used to go back was involved back then to produce the correct bike for Sea Otter, which is so
I
different
know.
to any other downhill race in the world.
Totally. Totally.
It's mental. Uh,
Totally.
but so obviously you had incredible success with the Iron Horse Sunday and the DW Link, and then obviously fast forwarding now to the World Cup. I'll jump forward a little bit. You've got the Athertons producing their own bikes now
Yep.
with the DW6 Link. Like, how different is that bike to the original Iron Horse Sunday? Would you say?
Well, I mean, obviously it's got completely different wheel size, which is a massive, massive, massive change. Huge, huge. Can't be understated how big that change is. It has way better functioning damper and fork. Like the stiction in the fork is far less. It's just a far better performing fork today. Everything's better. Tires, wheels, you name it. So aside from literally every single part that you bolt onto the bike being like orders of magnitude better, um, you know, I would say architecturally, from like a feel architecture standpoint, they're not entirely dissimilar. And I think like, man, I'll tell you a good one. I think I've talked about this publicly. I don't know, but I don't know if I have it. So we did a lot of testing with Athertons. I mean, G and Dan and Rach, I've known them since they were kids, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, geez. And I met Dan when I first met Dan, like it was just immediately apparent that like he just got it from like a testing standpoint, from like the way that he gave feedback. Like, most riders are just like, oh, you got to change, you got to make the leverage ratio this or whatever the hell it is, you got to change this thing, and they're giving you a solution. And Dan was like, this feels like this. I don't know why it feels like this, but it feels like this. Like, can we do this?
Mhm.
Or can we make it feel like this other way? And it's like kind of talking about symptoms as opposed to prescriptions.
Sure.
Um, and so like it it is awesome working with them because like we talk a lot about kind of that feel side of things and what's actually like how we're perceiving. It's like I'm sure you have the same language with your buddies. I know I do too. I mean, you're like, the difference between like, oh, the bike was like boop, 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 or it was like like, okay, to some some random person who never rode mountain bikes, they might have no clue what that is. But like between my buddies and I that I've ridden with
Yeah,
forever, like,
we know. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, we know. And so like being able to kind of talk through that stuff and then put like measurement to it, and then decide which ones we want more of and less of and blah blah blah. That conversation goes deep, but you can start to I get to kind of tailor the bike to kind of what people want. So I would say that like there's a lot of similarity between where the old Sunday was and where the Atherton bike is, even though they look really different. But there's also there's a lot of difference. And one of the things that's kind of crazy, I would say one of the big similarities, most people think, and if you look at like, these companies selling like aftermarket linkage kits and stuff, they're always like, oh, I'm going to give you this more progressive linkage. It's way better. Nobody's ever selling like a less progressive linkage,
No.
right? Ever. Every guru is like, oh, yeah, dude, yeah, you just got to do more. Yeah, this is going to be so much better. These guys have no clue what they're doing. Just make this thing,
Yeah.
more compression damping, more everything. We
Yeah.
tested like 19 bikes, 19 iterations or something with that downhill bike. Like it's an absurd amount of iterations.
Yeah.
Everything from like 500 millimeter long chain stays to you name it, all
Yeah.
kinds of crazy stuff.
Mhm.
The bike that Charlie won Worlds on last year, the bike that they have been racing on, is the lowest, if you're going to use progression as a measurement, the lowest progression bike that they built.
Yeah.
But lowest one we tested, it was literally designed for Rachel when she was injured to like be able to ease her back in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know a tiny bit of what you know on that stuff, but on the Nuke Proof, when I was working with Nuke Proof, we had the latest iteration before the carbon bike was a Nuke Proof Descent, and Dale in the workshop there, who's pretty good at setting bikes up, other than his where he puts his handlebars. Um, he had four different links that went. That was just a single pivot linkage driven
Yeah.
bike, but he had two different oval sort of pieces that went in the main pivot point, and the hole was offset. So we basically had four different settings for the progression on that bike, and then the Giga enduro bike, which I asked them to make, that just had two. So you just basically got one uh, link, and that had a lever, so you could change it between progression. It wasn't a massive difference, but there was a progressive setting and a linear setting. And on all of those bikes, I always opted, and most of us opted for the most linear. Not, I never wanted too much progression on the thing. It always seemed to work better in the more linear setting.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, those bikes aren't, I would say they're not necessarily linear in terms of leverage ratio, but again, it's not like we talk about leverage ratio a lot here, but it's not really I would say it's not like a massive focus, but it's just kind of one of those metrics, like, and kind of go into the point of like, some of this stuff is way overblown. People put way too much emphasis on like some of these measurables, not really understanding what's actually happening here. But by current bike industry measurables, like that bike doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
yet it
Well,
works.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I've not rode a downhill bike in a while now. I was out in Morsey the other week, and I realized that I do want to ride a downhill bike again before before it's too late. Uh, a lot more less wild than I used to ride one, but still,
Dude,
uh,
can you
I'd
turn it
like
off? That's the question. Can you turn it off? It's hard.
my fingers hit the brakes too much these days. But uh, I spoke to a couple of guys over there that had Atherton bikes, and they were absolutely blown away by them. Like one lad lives local to me, and where I live, you don't really need a downhill bike. You know, a long travel enduro bike is fine. Um, but out in Morsey, and he'd borrowed one, and he said, I'm buying one of these things as soon as I get home." And another guy I'd spoke to, he'd tested one out at Diffie Bike Park at the Atherton's Bike Park, and I think he'd done like 2 runs, and then he just bought one. You know, spent like eight
Sick.
thousand pound on a bike. He said it was that good. But when we were watching obviously been watching the World Cups, the first year that G was riding and Rachel
Mhm.
were riding one, uh, to me and a few of the other people on the team, it it didn't look like it was tracking the ground the very first bike
The-
as anywhere near as much as now. It looks unbelievable.
So the first year, the first couple races, they definitely had damper problems.
Okay.
And it's so funny because I was just looking through some stuff like yesterday, as I was talking to Rob Gow over at Atherton about some stuff, and I was just looking through some old feedback that Dan had given, and it was like they definitely, I mean, I don't know that it's like it's definitely not a secret on the circuit that like Fox has struggled with their dampers over the past, couple iterations. Like there's been some wild and unpredictable stuff that some of those dampers have done, and definitely, especially with the air shocks, like they were struggling early on
Mhm.
with Dune, and then we got it sorted out, but it just took a while because
Yeah.
there's the there's systems in place that, and there's kind of check boxes that need to be met that are outside of our control a lot of times to get to the point where they're really working.
Yeah.
So yeah, right at the very beginning, like we were just struggling with, bike was good in testing, and then all of a sudden we got new dampers, and the bike is not good. Not at whatever, it's not doing what it's supposed to be, and it was like the bike was like, I mean, I think ultimately what it came down to is there was too little high speed rebound in the damper at certain frequencies,
Okay.
and the thing was just getting kind of kicked off of some stuff.
How it
Like, but
looks.
then it would hook up in other places, and it was like hard to pin down why it was doing it until we realized what was actually the mechanism at work. But it was just a damper thing. But nothing's changed. Well, I shouldn't say nothing's changed. Changed. We obviously did 19 iterations of development, so
Yeah.
I mean, a lot has changed, but nothing like we're talking like a 5% overall difference in product as opposed to like it's not like a totally new bike.
No, I mean it looks very similar, and it just
Yeah.
looks like it's super dial now, and it works so much better than the very first ones that we kind of, I'd never rode one,
Yeah.
so I can't
It's
just by visual, watching it on the track. Um, but what would you like if you had um say yourself, you were starting your own program now with with any of your designs that you've done. Obviously, what I wanted to also touch on, which I'll go on to in a minute, is the evil bikes, of course. But um, you know, is looking at all the World Cup bikes and all the different dampers and forks and everything. Do you think there's like an outstanding suspension product that's the best to put on
no,
your design to make the best possible downhill bike, or do you think
no.
everything's quite similar?
I think it could make anything work, really. I mean, they all have their nuances of what is different and how to design around the everything's a compromise. I think you can always smell bullshit when anybody who tells you that they've built something that's completely uncompromised clearly has no clue what they're talking about, and it's all a compromise. Everything's a freaking compromise.
Yeah.
And so I would say that like you're able to compromise in any working with any of the suspension products, like they're all really good these days.
Mhm.
And I mean, like, granted, like, I mean, there are certainly like guys like I would, if I had to start a program, I'd try to coerce Nigel Reeve out of retirement and come and be our, be our mechanic and tune because the dude's a wizard and he's awesome, but like outside of that, like, I mean, I think having Ryder with the right mindset and like that the product isn't always the problem and that like they don't necessarily need to be like completely comfortable. every second of racing, and that they're going to have to make up for stuff like we're trying to take time out of the clock. So, the bike does its part, you do your part, neither should be comfortable.
Yeah. Sure.
It's not a pleasure machine. It's a race bike.
Yeah.
So like, I think like, yeah, as terms of bolt-on suspension components, like we can make them all work. They're all, I mean, at least with the top guys, I mean, I don't know about some of the like kind of smaller boutique stuff, that's,
Mhm.
I'm sure some are great. I haven't ridden everything, so, but for the
Yeah.
majors, yeah, they're all pretty good.
Right. Sure. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot of talk, at the World Cups, like how planted Loic Bruni's bike looks. From someone with your experience, does his bike look more planted than a lot of other people's, or do you think it's his riding style that does that?
I just think it's him.
Yeah.
I think it's him. I
Mm.
mean, yeah, I think it's him. And I don't think looking planted makes you fast. I mean, think about Gwyn when he was destroying everybody. He destroyed everybody on a bike that literally had two-wheel steering. Like, like it doesn't. I mean, dude, the fastest person is gonna win most times.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of it. Like, yeah, the bike can do a little bit, but the bike is there to like support the rider. It's up to the rider to do the work.
Yeah. Sure.
So, I mean, like, I think again, it comes down to the whole package: tires, freaking inserts, whatever you're doing, across the boards, everything, mental prep. I
Yeah.
mean, like, how many times have you worked with riders where they had like a bad run and came down and, whatever, you turned a couple knobs, it did nothing, and then they went up and absolutely smashed it, and literally nothing had changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hell, myself included. Like, really,
It's
like,
mainly fear in it.
yeah. I mean, I just think I don't know that looking planted or not looking planted is faster or slower. I mean, the stopwatch is the stopwatch.
Yeah.
Whoever wins was the fastest, and whatever combination of man and machine that got there was the best on the day and the best performing for the track. That's the
No.
bottom line.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the contrast last year, not this year, last year, obviously the two top overall finishing guys was Jackson Goldstone and Loic, and Loic's riding style and the way he looks on the track, he's stuck to the ground, minimum air time or fancy stuff, and then you've got Jackson who looks like he's at the dirt jumps, just
Sure.
pop way down the track. It's incredible contrast in two different riding styles.
And they both looked that way their whole careers.
Yeah, yeah,
Just like Sam and Rennie looked completely different and both had their moments at the same exact time.
yeah, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, like, I think, horses for horses. Now, granted, like, would I love to have seen what Sam could have done on an iron horse, when he got super fit, when he went to specialized? Like, dude, I would have bet my house that Sam wouldn't have been able to outsprint G, but yet he did it in CR in Slalom the next year. Like he put on a lot of muscle. I would have loved, like, I mean, I don't want to ruffle feathers, but I always felt like watching him ride the specialized bike, like he was being held back by the bike in my mind. Now, granted, that was just me, wanting to think that. I don't know, but I mean, I
No,
rode the bike back to back with my own stuff and like didn't love it. Didn't feel like it did much for me.
no.
But then again, horses for courses. Maybe it was maybe to spend more time with it or give it a more fair shake. I can't say like it's hard to look back and say like you're jaded or not, right?
Oh, I mean,
But
the conversations I've had with Sam, he loved riding the Iron Horse Sunday, so obviously you've
yeah.
done an incredible job with that.
Oh
And
man, loved working with Sam. Loved working with Sabrina, Bryn. I mean, that was just the and Heimdall and JC as well. I mean, it was just had some really great times with them. It was cool. Cool time, man. Cool experience for sure.
yeah, I mean,
I mean,
all done an incredible job of
dude,
making the sport better than than it was.
I
Um,
honestly don't want to like discount too, like working with Stevie Smith for all those years, and like he was like super loyal and basically rode like stuff that I developed like his whole career outside of like the year that he was on Cove with Gabe, early on. And like Nigel, I mean, dude, winning an overall was huge with them, and like
incredible.
also an amazing getting at the problem and solving that problem, getting down the hill fast in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Totally different way.
Right. So,
I mean,
so how much work did you do with Da Vinci at that point?
I conceived and I conceived that entire bike.
The
So
from the scratch. So
I,
they decided
yeah,
to do a downhill program and then
I
they
can.
got you to design the bike for them.
So they did the structure, the structure part, but I did all the geometry, all the suspension stuff, like really spent a lot of effort talking through stiffness and kind of what targets we're going to hit and all that stuff. Same thing with the current pivot bike, like that current pivot bike on the World Cup circuit. Like I literally conceived that, like, actually, it's funny, like everybody seen this pivot bike, but like they were literally the last of my partners to actually see that design. Like they were the first one to actually build it. But I mean, I showed that to Atherton's a year before Pivot saw it at all.
So
Um,
the prototype pivot you're talking about that they're on
yep,
with the high pivot and the two chains.
yep.
Okay. So what do you think to and then obviously, you've got your Delta Link suspension on the Evil bikes, which is single pivot
Yep.
linkage driven. What is the to you, Dave, does it to everybody who's, because everyone gets, so et up on a certain type of linkage, the common cell's pretty complicated with they call it a 6-bar high pivot.
Yeah, like it.
How much difference to the overall ride of the bike do you think it matters as you whether it's a single pivot linkage or a 6 pivot high pivot bike? How much difference do you think it actually makes?
Well, it depends on if you get it right or wrong. I mean,
No.
that's really the question. There's a lot more opportunity to get it wrong with more complexity. Your
Yeah.
pencil has to be a lot sharper. There's a lot more opportunity there. But, much like an M16 versus an AK-47, like they're both very effective machines,
Mhm.
like an AK gets there one direction and M16 gets there another direction. Is one better than the other? Age old debate. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, I, I will like everything's a compromise. So, for example, like like trunnion shocks, right? Like I know a lot of people hate trunnion shocks, like, but that was something that, like, from my standpoint, like that was something I proposed to Rock Shocks to solve a very specific problem. And when Boob Bar and I spent a lot of time talking about that early on, because swing arms were getting too damn big, they were literally becoming too stiff, and I needed to be able to compact swing arms and get the leverage ratio change in the shocks while also running longer stroke shocks on longer stroke bikes. And so like it's like a self-scaling problem. Like if you make the shock longer, like, you know how this goes, the link gets bigger, the swing arm gets bigger, everything gets bigger, everything gets taller, and like then your stiffness is getting out of control, and like things become just a huge issue. So like, little stuff like that has like made a big difference. And I'll say like some designs you're are easier to compromise in some areas rather. And I'll use a perfect example, like a 4-bar DW link, and let's say the linkage driven single pivot for an Evil, right?
Yeah.
The Delta. So for longer travel bikes, the 4-bar DW link is harder for me to deal with from a stiffness standpoint because the rear triangle is just getting bigger
Yeah.
and it's getting more stiff.
Uh-huh.
Like it's just less compliant. And so the only solution is and I'm talking about comparing apples to apples here. I'm not calling comparing to some other brand or whatever, just kind of trying to compare to some baseline, right?
Yeah.
Um, like in order to make it get to the like where the level of compliance that I want it to be, there's like want to keep the swing arm at a certain size or kind of limited, or you kind of at limits of materials and wall thicknesses with materials that you can deal with. So you're just kind of up against some mechanical constraints, some structural constraints. And so an Evil is, we'll say, in essence, a DW link leverage ratio on a single pivot.
Okay. So it's
Basically,
tried to emulate the lever ratio similar to
no,
get
I wasn't trying to do that. That's just where it ended up.
where it ended up. Okay.
Yeah, it's just where it needed to be to get to where we want it to hit from a feel standpoint. Again, like I'm not working forwards from like, graphs or curves or whatever. I'm working backwards from this is what we want this thing to feel like, what the whole package is going to be in
Yeah.
different situations. And then we kind of I work into where the last thing I look at is what those graphs are. And I don't really
No.
care. Like not
Yeah.
really super important to me. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like I print them out for like magazines and people that care or whatever, but it's not really like something I'm like, oh wow, I need to really look at this today. This is super important. Like it's driving my design decisions. It's
Yeah.
irrelevant.
Got you.
So the thing is with the Evil, I can make the swing arm whatever the heck I want. Like, can make it as compliant in any direction, can make it torsionally one thing and, vertically something else and laterally something else, whatever. You can kind of control them semi-independently,
Yeah.
at least more so than with the 4-bar DW link, where I'm kind of you know, stuck where we are,
Yeah.
or to some degree, right? And they kind of have to, you have to make compromises, either adding travel or whatever. But on the alternative side, like, you have two links on a 4-bar DW link, and they're kind of oriented in a way that is structurally advantageous, say compared to like a VPP, which are loaded in probably the most disadvantageous way possible, because you have this upper link that's just like completely in torsion. So you have to try to make some massively torsionally stiff link to do anything in the, with the rear of the bike. And then as it twists, it becomes more in line with the suspension. And so the entire stiffness of the swing arm completely changes, like, through the travel.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, with the 4-bar DW link, it kind of stays similar through
Yeah.
the entirety of the travel, or
Sure.
at least the parts where you care, we'll say. And with the single pivot, you kind of don't have that problem at all. You just got to make everything burly, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's maybe not stiff enough torsionally, but you can kind of make up for it in places. So, it's always that balance.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why, like, it's kind of like the question you asked, or earlier, about, like, how did you make the Sunday feel like it is? It's like kind of like that, all those intangibles, all that stuff that's happening dynamically. And like when you sling your leg over the bike, and then you're like, wow, you'll find times when you ride a bike and then you get off it and you just got to look at it and be like, what the fuck? Like, what is this thing? This thing's awesome. What is it doing? Or like, what, like, did not expect this thing to feel like this, And like,
Well,
that's kind of it.
like I mentioned to you a while ago when I spoke to you, I've always been a fan of the Evils, and I just always like the look of them, and I just
Thank you.
when I like the look of a bike, it makes me excited to want to ride it, and then when I um, got to ride one this year, Reckoning, it was as good as it looked to me. Like I loved riding that bike. It's fantastic. So congratulations on that one for sure.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll say, like, Kevin Walsh, who's one of the main owner of Evil, and we've been friends for a long time. Like, when we really started working on, Evil 2.0, like, made a concerted effort to not, like, get super deep into the tech side. Everyone's doing that. Everyone's trying to sell all kinds of crazy stuff, and they're talking about stuff that they don't understand, and just kind of making it up. And like, we just didn't want to be that, um, but there's a lot of secret sauce in those bikes,
Yeah.
and a lot of time and effort, like, spent by the whole team there in terms of stiffness testing and, ride field testing. Kind of, there's a lot for a company that doesn't necessarily market technology or talk about it that much, or really, like, like, there's a lot of cool work that's happened behind the scenes there. So, it's,
Yeah.
like I said, kind of, you can get there all kinds of different ways, and like, I'm a firm believer that, like, not every product can't be everything to everybody. Like, what you and I like is probably pretty similar, because, like,
Sure.
we grew up doing really similar stuff. But, like, probably there's other people that, like, will ride that and be like, whoa, this is, like, too much in every direction for me, and I need,
Yeah.
something completely different,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a great bike, and yeah, I love it. But what what would you say? Obviously, you've done so much on with so many different brands and so many um, amazing projects, and you've had great success. What is the one that stands out as the most you're proud of? Would you say, or is it just you've done so many cool things that I'm sure it's hard to come up with an answer to that one.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not much of a, like, probably to a detriment, but I don't really spend a lot of time kind of looking back or thinking about the past, or kind of all that, accolades. Like, I don't really, like, get super, like, amped up on that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I'm always just kind of looking forward to the future, and kind of, what's the next thing, and kind of what's that next problem to solve. And so, yeah, I guess I probably should reflect on some of that, I guess, but I don't know, I mean, they've all been fun in their own right. Honestly, I think, if I really got to think back, like, the most important thing, and to me, and the thing that's been the most fun, had really been just, like, traveling and meeting people, meeting, I mean, dude, like how I don't even know how many years ago we met. 20? I don't even remember.
Yeah, I don't know.
Long time
It's
ago. But like,
flies by.
those, yeah, those are the things that stick out, man. The relationships and just like the good times and the just the funny stuff. I mean, like, I think people, especially people that view the current World Cup, it's become quite a bit quite vanilla. But like back in the day, it was pretty freaking wild, like
It
what was
was.
happening.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like those days were great, man. I mean, I think
Yeah,
those are the best parts of it.
yeah, it's gone a lot more. Well, from the outside, it looks a lot more professional, and just everyone does the job. All the big teams have got so many different staff members that do so many different things for the athletes. It wasn't like that back in the day. I mean, I remember when Petey rode for GT, and the
Yeah,
big GT team in the early
yeah,
2000s, and they had a swan year and all that kind of stuff. But that was
that was beautiful.
quite different to most programs, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was the only one.
Yeah,
That was pretty
you
incredible, though.
basically did practice, rip round all week on your bike in the parking lot, finding stuff to jump off, and then after the race, you went and got absolutely wasted and started
Yep.
again next week.
Start it over. Let's go. Exactly. Where are we going to ride between the next race? Exactly.
Yeah, but I remember. I don't know if you remember, but I remember JC, when he worked for us. He always told me a funny story about. I don't know if it was Whistler or a World Cup or something, and I guess you were kind of you were hanging out with them guys, and Sam got completely wasted,
Oh,
and
bro.
you were
Oh,
trying to look after him, and he kept running off or something.
dude, he was on an absolute bender, an absolute bender. And
Yeah.
like nobody else could keep up with him. I was literally the only one who could run as fast as him and
You
keep
were
up with him.
chasing him
And so
round.
like we would get him and then he would get another beer somehow and fucking pound it. So I get a beer and pound it and sprint. So we were literally just running through the town, going to different places. We couldn't speak the language. It was in Italy in Livigno, just
So
drinking beers all over the town. I don't know that we paid for one. And like just sprinting everywhere. It was so funny, man. It was so funny.
brilliant, brilliant. That's great.
Oh, yeah, I remember like, yeah, somebody's like, dude, we're just gonna let him run off. And they're like, dude, you gotta chase him. I'm like, oh shit. Like, we had been, I mean, we had been, I think we had drank like, I don't know, 100 Red Bull and vodkas with the MS Intense guys before that,
Oh God,
probably.
yeah. I had a night with them, and it didn't end well.
No, never did.
Oh no.
Those are the days, man. Those are the memories right there. Those are the projects that really stick out. Like, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. I mean, there's so much hard work goes in behind all them times, from everybody. So it's sometimes it's cool to cut loose in it. And
it's funny, Nigel. I have thought about this frequently. Like, we'd go to races and events and stuff like trade shows. And like at that point, like the work is over. Like I've been working 20-hour days for freaking 8 months, like fully freaking pinned and like full, just ready to wild out and like let loose a little bit. And like, we all get to hang out together at these events and like everyone would probably think of each other as like complete animals. But like reality is 90% of the time we're just like focused,
yeah,
like working so hard, like trying to do something, but we only see each other like in this moments of like completely wilding out and just letting
yeah, yeah,
loose.
yeah. Absolutely true, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
It's
Um,
funny.
um, so going back to all your projects that you're currently working on, obviously you're working with the Athertons. I guess you're
Hmm.
still working with Pivot. Who else with Evil? What other projects are you working
Yep.
with, Dave, currently, like
So
ongoing?
pivot, so evil, ibis, pivot, Esker out of the so Esker is coming back. They kind of went away for a little while. Their first product was an Orion trail bike, and it was kind of a more conservative. The guys from there, that's the guy Tim who started that company. He's an awesome guy,
Right.
and he came from Salsa. I worked with him at Salsa when I had before Split Pivot became was killed by Trek essentially. Like I worked with them. And they were fantastic, and I got to know them really well. And he moved on from there and started his own brand. So they're actually coming back pretty soon. Um, with some I don't want to spill the beans for him because it's not my place to, but I've been riding it. It's pretty good.
Cool.
Pretty excited for them.
Yeah.
And a couple other projects in the works. For years I said no to everything. Like everything. Like, I mean, dude, Like once a month at least, someone's asking if can help start a new bike brand. And if I've done everything. Like I mean, I'm known for the design, this kind of racing stuff and the success there, and the different, building all these different downhill bikes that have been on podiums and all that, which is super cool. But like, done everything. I've been the CEO, I've been the janitor, I've done everything.
Yeah, yeah,
So like, helping these kind of small stage companies start up and like understand how to navigate everything from how do you structure your business to how do you source products, how do you set up quality systems, you name it, like across the boards, all of that stuff. So I'm
right,
working with two new ones, one of which I started in 2019 and got mothballed due to the pandemic and is back, that I'm
right.
really excited about. Guys out of Colorado, out of Breckenridge.
Oh,
And
nice.
then another group out of that's I guess, I mean, really they're based out of Virginia, but I don't know where the headquarters of their bike brand will be. But it's another really cool one that's well capitalized. So two new ones that are like coming up that are pretty exciting.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And is your time with all those different brands quite similar, or is there some brand
Um,
that takes a lot more of your time up?
I mean, I'm willing to spend however much time they feel that they can use to, I mean, I'm there to help them succeed, and I always say like I am, especially on the product side, like I'm there to help them fulfill their vision. Like, don't get me wrong, like I've been very forceful with like Ibis and Pivot over the years in terms of geometry and like how I felt like they needed to adapt, and kind of just keep pushing from a suspension standpoint, from a geometry standpoint, like kind of just helping. I don't know, helping is probably the. I'm sure it was very annoying for them to like have me like kind of continually like being like, this is cool, but can we go this way? Can we push farther here? Can we push farther here? Can we push farther here? And like um but by and large, I want them to like have ownership of their product and their ride feel and kind of what it is, and try to
Yeah,
help them have their own DNA that's,
yeah,
I think hopefully palatable to the public. I mean, if I had free reign to do anything I wanted, then everything would feel like an evil. And
sure.
that's not for everybody. I mean, reality is like it's just that's there's I mean a lot more less aggressive bikes sold than evils.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's just the reality of it. But I'm
And
willing to spend the time, any amount of time that my partners want. Like I'm there for them. It's just a matter of, you know,
and yeah. What do you sort of what's your meaning when you're saying less aggressive as the evil? What do you mean there?
well, like, okay. So around 2010, 29, 2009, 2010, I like was starting to make just trail bikes to me were just boring.
Yeah,
Like I didn't like them. I wanted like just aggressive trail bikes. So I literally just came up with this term aggressive trail to like describe some bikes. And we started making bikes like that. First one was actually for a company called BH, was the
yeah,
first one that was marketed as aggressive trail. And that bike was honestly too flexy, but it was a 26-inch wheel trail bike with like a 65-degree. And in the end, I think it was a 65, 110 millimeters of mechanical trail, like 65-ish head angle, like low. So like it was badass bike,
yeah,
just flexed too much when you rode it really hard.
yeah,
Um, and that is really the vein of what evil is. Like everything has been, lower or longer, I won't say long for the sake of just being long. It's not like a pole, like it's just like, you
yeah,
know, somehow ridiculously long and like, it's, fits people that are normal sized. Just you can push it. But I would say like somebody else described it this way, but it was like kind of skateboarding on the trail. Like you're pop, and I would say for my style, like I'm always looking for some little hip off the side of the trail that freaking hit anything, just a rock. I don't care. Like
yeah,
I'm never just like riding along in a straight line.
yeah, yeah, sure.
So, those bikes are made for that. And like, honestly, I know this from riding with a whole load of people, a lot of people. There aren't a lot of people that are doing that stuff. Like most people are just kind of pedaling along, and kind of doing their thing. And, they might appreciate that feat, that kind of personality of that bike, or they might not.
Yeah, yeah.
Doesn't mean you can't just ride it along, but like,
No, it's definitely it's a fun bike. What what I really got I mean I've rode some great bikes over the years, but I just the Reckoning that I've only rode the Reckoning out of all the different bikes, but it it feels like it's got all the travel I need for rough downhill stuff, but it just pops around and hops off stuff like
Mhm.
a much more playful non-downhill bike. So it's like it does both things really well.
Yeah.
Um, that's the experience I got, and which is perfect bike for me.
Yeah, it feels good. Like I like it too. Like it feel like it transfers real like when those transfer lines when you're kind of like side hopping between one part of the trail and the other, and it like really feels to me comfortable.
Yeah,
Like just neutral doing that
neutral.
kind of stuff.
Yeah,
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 it's just like it's there. It's like it's the right amount of push. It's like predictable. Like you can kind of push off of it and you can kind of flick it off and kind of just just catches just right. Just,
yeah. It's a great bike. I love it. I'm obviously you'll have rode all the different models in the Evil range. What's your personal favorite and why?
hmm. Boy, that's hard. I mean, they're all I think they're all great tools for the job, you know. I mean, like where I used to live before I moved down south here.
Mhm.
The following, I built that bike. I literally designed, conceived, designed, and built that bike to ride my local trails. So
Okay.
that bike was pretty meant for riding where I was, you know, where I used to live.
Yeah.
Um, eh, I mean, but you know, you could do some laps on it, you know, up at the mountain, but you don't really want to ride that thing all day on the mountain. You know, reckoning is pretty epic when you get on the hill. You know, I mean, probably maybe not enough for some of those big hits at Diffie, but other than that, you know, I mean, like normal mountain riding, you could probably ride that thing all day. I'd ride Whistler on that bike all day, no problem.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And you know, the offering is definitely in between with the three of them. I mean, the offering's another I mean, like any 140-ish millimeter travel trail bike, like kind of a real sweet spot. You know, if you got bigger stuff, you get any amount of rocks, like you can pedal that thing all day anyways, doesn't matter. Like I mean, also a pretty rad bike. They all have their day, man. They're all good. And I mean, you know, there's plenty of other brands and bikes that are kind of in that categories as well that, you know,
Yeah. 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 It's I mean I think in the just recently, I don't know if it's just because I've been out in out to Europe a couple of times, some more Morzine area and stuff, but and then obviously places like Diffie in the UK, this definitely seems a bit of a resurgence with downhill bikes coming back. Um, for a while there, everyone kind of just had a long travel trail bike, and probably especially in the UK, um, a lot of people over if they're going to pick one bike, they'll sort of overbike for probably where they live. Where I live, I live in Scotland now and in Tweed Valley, and there's tons of trails, but you've got to pedal up to them. There is a shuttle service on one side of the valley, but all the really good trails on what's called the golfy side is you have to pedal up. Um, and either following or reckoning would be okay depending on your riding ability. Um, but yeah, I definitely think there's a bit of a surge that's coming back in downhill bikes. Obviously, e-bikes are important as well now. A lot of people want an e-bike. Um, but do you think there'll ever be a time where Eva will come back with a downhill bike in the future? Do you think that's a
and
possibility, or you just don't know?
I mean, nobody loves designing, you know, a new fresh downhill bike more than me.
Yeah,
Done a lot of them and
yeah,
put a lot of them on podiums. So it's, you know, I would love nothing more than to do it. It's just a matter of, you know, the fit. You know, one thing I'll say observationally, Nigel, it's interesting, like, and I'm not a marketing or market research kind of savant of any type, but just kind of watching things, it seems like the bike industry is on like a 10 or 11 year or so cadence of like recycling the same stuff. Like I remember back like in the late 90s, early 2000, like late 90s, we were all running like super short, like zero stems and like high rise bars. And then we realized like, okay, this sucks. It's horrible. I can't get any weight over the front wheel. Like, and we all ditched it. And then 10 years later, it was back. And like, everyone's like, oh, fucking, and Brooke almost died basically because he couldn't get any freaking, you know, weight over his front wheel.
yeah,
Right. Like, and we're like, all right, like, and then we're back to like, okay, yeah, I remember now it doesn't work. And like,
yeah,
I kind of wonder, like, I've heard that from a few people about like, you know, seeing a lot of downhill bikes around more and more recently. And I don't know if that's because like they're getting blown out at crazy low prices right now because of effects due to the pandemic and
Yeah.
Therefore, people are just buying them, something they never would have bought before. Or
Yeah.
if people have just literally never had the experience riding downhill bikes at a park and don't realize how hard you actually have to ride that bike to start making it be fun,
Yeah.
which I'm just unwilling to put the effort in at this point in my life. I'm just done. Like I don't like I want to ride a downhill bike, but like for 2 laps, that's
Yeah.
it. Then I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't want to exert myself that hard to corner like every freaking corner. And so like we all learned that in real time and then just started riding and building like like building bikes like the Giga and the Reckoning, right? It just so we had something to go to the park and rip that
Yeah.
wasn't a full-on downhill bike
Yeah.
because I want to ride, 14 runs, not
Yeah.
two. And so I wonder if there's like, people get all these bikes and then they're gonna ride and be like, oh my God, this is so much effort. It's too hard to ride. I'm going slow. I'm washing out everywhere because I'm not, riding hard enough on the front wheel. Like I'm making the bike too soft to ride, and now the geometry doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Like all that stuff, but
Yeah.
I know we'll see.
Yeah. Definitely. And do you think there's a market for a downhill e-bike? Because
I
obviously,
mean,
you
I've
know,
tried to convince everybody I work with to build that. I've been wanting to build that since forever. I mean,
I,
I don't know. There's probably not a market for it, but I want one.
yeah, same.
At least there's two of them that can be bought.
If you do one, send me one, please.
Will do. I would love it, man. I mean, I think, I think it would be super fun.
Yeah.
I don't think that you necessarily need to build like a World Cup.
No.
Like, I don't think you take like a World Cup bike and throw the geometry on there, and all of a sudden you have your bike. Like that's probably gonna suck.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think there's something there. I don't
Yeah,
know. I'd like to ride it. So
I
I
do.
could be wrong. I'm willing to be wrong. Whatever.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's because we're getting older, but I've got a friend that lives in the valley here, and he's a few years older than me, but he's still holding out on. He won't buy an e-bike. I mean, they're quite stubborn in Scotland, and they're quite tight with the money. But he's like, I'm not buying an e-bike until there's a downhill e-bike. Long travel. If I've got a motor to help me get up the hill, then I want a long travel, downhill bike version, which is something.
I'm not much for principles for the sake of principles, but I think that's one worth sticking to his guns for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I mean, that resonates with me pretty good. I mean, I don't blame him on that at all.
for sure.
I mean,
Well,
the e-bike that I ride the most is a Apocalypse, right? So that's like about the longest travel. It's got a 180 fork on it, and
yeah.
you know, like that's
Yeah, I've not rode one of them yet. I'm looking forward to hopefully riding one at some point. Them things look amazing.
oh, it's awesome. You just ride it on regular old trails, man. It's fine. Just pedal it around. No big deal.
Yeah,
Things
it
mint.
looks amazing.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and so if somebody did come to you, Dave, with unlimited budget, the World Cup's going to be on the TV. There's all these big sponsors that they're telling us that it might happen in the future. Um, and it was basically someone come in and said, right, we want you to build the downhill bike for the program. You do the whole thing. You can choose the riders with the budget. um is there a brand that you would do that with, or is there a brand that or would you start something fresh with a completely new design that you've not used with a brand before? Or is that not a question you could really answer?
I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, like, I don't make the decisions fully at any brand. So, like, it wouldn't be like if you're coming to me with something like that today, and like, somebody comes to me with something like that today, like, it's hard for me to say because I don't make the decisions for, in whole for every brand. Like, I got to automatically loop people in who have, their own agendas and whatever, right? Like, but I mean, talk about a dream situation, right? I mean, talk about a dream situation, like building a product for to stoke the public up and stoke the riding public up on like our sport, and like building, new ground up downhill bikes. I mean, who doesn't freaking love that? Like, that's like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah,
So, I mean, it's pretty hard to, it's pretty hard to not give that one a pretty fair shake, right?
sure. I,
Um,
I Have you got some ideas that you would like to try that you've not tried with another brand yet, or?
Oh, yeah, of course. I've already pitched a couple of them. So that obviously that bike that I pitched to Pivot, like that they built, the dual idler, flex the 6 bar flex day dual idler bike is pretty freaking cool.
That
And I
looks
mean, they
incredible.
were somewhat apprehensive about it. So like I designed them a 4 bar like facsimile bike to test side by side to prove that it was actually faster, better, which it did in testing, which was awesome to see like, hey, okay, can actually take like, a second and a half out of the course, out of a short course, like just by changing bikes with the same rider.
Yeah.
Um, but there's always room, and there's always, like I said, everything's a compromise. So like I have definitely have a bunch of stuff kind of in that vein that is, different, that, addresses other compromises and might introduce other challenges. But like there's always something. Every time we learn one thing, like every time we do something, we learn like five more. I learn like five more things. It's just like there's always, just got to continually learn, keep learning, That's it.
Well, I mean, I can still tell you've got that same excitement and passion about doing that stuff, which is amazing. After all these years, I love seeing that. That's brilliant.
And I just wish I could ride the way that I, used to, and not like just without fear of my kneecap like exploding out of my knee or something. Like,
Same, mate. I think I'm going through a midlife crisis of feeling
oh,
like I'm the world's worst bike rider at the moment, and it's it's just inevitable, isn't it?
get been there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeesh. Yeah, I've already come to terms with that. That sucks. That sucks.
I struggle to get around the pump track looking half decent these days. It's flipping sad.
Oh, it's
But,
crazy,
but,
but
but I
true.
still love riding the bike, and it's great just getting out there, isn't it? And if you're riding a bike that you really enjoy riding, like I said with the Evil Reckoning, it's a pleasure to get out there.
And I'm
Uh,
so stoked that you like that bike so much, man. That's awesome.
I
It's a
love
huge
it, man.
compliment.
Yeah,
I
I love it.
appreciate it.
Yeah, good
That
job.
one's got, I mean, that bike is one that I conceived and like fought for. Like that bike. That's a funny story. Um, Luis, me, and Darren from Silverfish like were very bullish on like 150 millimeter travel 650B. They were like, we need this 27.5 bike back at that point in time. And so I was like, really didn't want to build that bike. I really didn't, because I was like, I just felt like I'm like, this is gonna die in the market, and like we need to build like a full on 29-inch like race bike, which hadn't, I mean, Specialized had the enduro, but that geometry on that bike was like, it was so steep and so high. It was just, it was kind of hard bike to ride. It was like just too tippy everywhere.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah,
too it's hard to go fast on.
yeah.
And so like I basically made a deal with the guys at Evil. It's like, listen, I'll design this 150 millimeter bike if we can build a 160 something millimeter 29er. And they were like, all right, fine, whatever, fuck it. And I'm like,
Oh,
come
wow.
on, we hit one with the following, like, is that bike, like nobody wanted to do that, and it turned out awesome. Like, we're gonna do it, like, and I'm like kind of like, I hope this works,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
but
No, I
it was,
think you just know, don't you? Like I had quite a few discussions trying to talk nuke proof into making the Giga, and when they first did that, they were going to order like one bike to 4 megas, and I'm like, no, you need to at least order the same amount of these, and turned out everybody wanted one of those that was a nuke proof customer, and like you say, I think sometimes I don't know, people get too into what they think the customers are going to want and not what we know that is going to ride really good. Do you know what I mean? It's weird.
yeah, there's a fine balance between, too much market research and not enough, I guess, right? I mean, you gotta know your customer, but your feedback you're getting is basically 3 years old, because they're looking at least whatever came out last year and then riding that, like, and you're already 2 years into the product cycle no matter what.
That's it.
So like they're basically telling you what they wanted 2 years ago
Yeah, yeah. 100%.
in your cycle. So you got to kind of be ahead of that and like be able to kind of extrapolate and predict kind of where they want it. But and that's the thing too, like when you have like paradigm shifts in technology, like, just take advantage of them and move with them. Like the bash guard stuff really opened up what I could do with geometry and suspension, like, and it's not immediately apparent that that was the driving thing, the like lead metric of everything. Like you look at it in a vacuum and it's just like that was some irrelevant fucking thing. Like we just made the bikes and the bikes were better. but like it actually was that like we didn't explode our drivetrain anymore. Like every time you touch the ground, and the chain guide could be like in the mud and it didn't matter. So then
Yeah,
you could just make the BB way the hell lower, like dynamically,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then the bike could go way faster everywhere.
yeah. And then everybody else tried to make their bikes with lower bottom brackets and
Yeah, it
didn't.
went real bad. It went really bad. That was a bad few years. Oh God.
Quite a
Yeah.
lot, quite a lot of smashed pedals on the ground and over the bars moments.
Man, thinking back, it's probably why E13 had so much success in
Yeah,
those few years after, because like everybody was like, "Oh God, I need a bash guard just getting ruined. I need something that's going to stay in one piece."
absolutely. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
probably something to it. I
yeah,
never really thought of it that way.
yeah. And to be fair, some of the stuff Sam was doing on the bike, he didn't need to pedal because he was going that fast. So then people were trying to pedal with the super low bottom
Oh
bracket with
yeah.
bikes and clipping the pedals, and it was all going wrong.
You
Uh,
know, DW links in general pump so good. Like they generate so much speed pumping because of the way that that suspension works, and
yeah,
that is like a huge factor in what makes that system work so well for like
yeah,
riders that ride that way, and especially for downhill.
yeah,
Like they just do generate speed. Like I mean, you can see that when you look at it on data and stuff too. Like they really generate speed pumping.
yeah, yeah,
So it was like kind of it was always deceptive too. Like it looks like Sam's not putting any effort in, but he's just pumping everywhere.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't think his brakes ever worked, so that's was a big factor. Um,
Don't need them.
he didn't need brakes, no,
Yeah.
not with his skills.
Yeah.
Um, and so and so obviously, day to day stuff now is that I know you're a busy man. Do you get much time for your RC hobby? Because I know you love doing the
Not
RC.
as much as like I'd like to. I mean, Jesus, that's been talk about a humbling freaking hobby, man. I suck at that. Jesus. I wish I
It's
was.
something that you love doing.
It's funny, man. Like I've been lucky to be like, probably like most of us, like raced downhill and stuff. Like I can go throw darts and like can be pretty good at throwing darts, or like, throwing cornhole bags. Like I can just, drop them in. Like what did it matter? Like ring toss game. Like I do that blindfolded, drop it on all the time. Stuff like that. Man, RC stuff, I'm like disconnected from the thing. I'm controlling it through the controller. And Jesus, I just can't freaking get to that next level. It's so hard. Like
Yeah.
it's so frustrating, man. Like,
I
which
don't, I
makes me
don't
want to like do better at it so much more. Like
don't think I could do that. I had a
it's
little
so
go at RC cars when I was real young. My friend got really into it, but I didn't have a great car, and yeah, it wasn't. It was really difficult. So I can imagine it's frustrating as well.
sucks because I can see what the car is doing on the track. I know I'm, tuning it. I mean, these things are complicated. Like
Yeah,
there's a lot going on. Like you're tuning everything.
yeah,
And it's just brutal when like I'm struggling and then like a buddy of mine is like, "Oh, let me drive this," and they like set their fastest lap by like a half a second. And you're like, "God, sucks." It's totally me. That sucks. It's the worst.
yeah, yeah.
Like, God damn it. And they're like, "Oh, what did you do to this car? Like, this thing's amazing." I'm like, "I can't get this thing's horrible. What are you like, I'm still trying to make it better."
Brilliant, brilliant.
So I don't get enough time to really I'd love to be able to spend more time just getting better at driving, but it's just, you don't have the time in the day. Like there's too many bike projects. I got, 7-year-old boy. Like I'm really, really trying to like put the time into being a dad and not like, I mean, I know you've lived the life of like working, 16-hour days for years upon years, right? And like that's like I remember when I cut back to 10-hour days and feeling guilty that I was like I felt guilty. Like it wasn't like just subconscious. I'm like, oh man, I need to be working more. Like this is crazy. Like I don't and like that's incredible to think.
Yeah,
Like I'm working a 60-hour week, 70-hour week, and that's like my brain is telling me like I'm not doing enough.
yeah, yeah,
And so I'm trying to cut it back to like 50, and like be a dad and kind of, get out in the yard and like, be the leader for throwing the ball and like get him out, and we do a lot of Legos. That's been fun.
Lego's great. We love Lego in here. It's good. I think was it last Christmas I got it's just over there. Bought a Lego. Don't know if you've got it. A Lego Pac-Man. Like
Oh,
old
I've seen
arcade
it.
machine.
Yeah, sick.
Yeah.
That's
Uh,
cool.
Yeah, Maya and Harrison loves Lego, and then Maya always ends up helping him do it.
A year today.
What's
Yeah.
Was it a year today?
A year today.
What, when we got that?
Yeah, it
Oh, no way.
Christmas
A
before.
year today we got the Pac-Man machine.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Sick.
great. It's a great little thing. It's
I
expensive though.
oh yeah, dude, crazy money. Yeah, you know, I feel like it's worth it. Like whatever, you know. I mean, yeah, I started getting him. I got him Technic stuff. Like I just bought him a bunch of bricks and let him build stuff. But I'll tell you, the one that we did recently that I'm sure you will love. I took my SolidWorks seat. I bought it like a $400 workstation, like refurbished off of Amazon, and I put it in the kitchen and I put a SolidWorks seat on it for him. And he's been like designing parts.
No way, that's brilliant.
He designed this like Minecraft, like whatever, pickaxe that we like printed on the bamboo over here. Like that's pretty
Brilliant.
cool. It's
Oh,
cool.
my little lad did Minecraft for so long. He did some incredible stuff on that. It's brilliant.
Mind blowing to me.
Yeah, I don't even. He's just going like this with his controller, and there's shit built, and I'm just like, what? How do you even know how to do that?
Yeah. Oh, I know more about different blocks in Minecraft just from him talking about it that I feel like it's like ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. And what other stuff does he like doing?
I got him one of those Stasics, that little motocross bike when he was like 2. So he rips that thing around quite a bit, you know, and he isn't like he's not super motivated to do sports, but like I've been trying, like the kid can hit a ball, he can hit like he can hit a ball pretty damn well. And like been trying to get him into that. We just brought him to drums the other day. That was a wild one. We just like 2 days ago, we brought him to like his first drum lesson. It was like a trial.
Yeah.
And you know, everyone, hey, listen, everyone talks about their kid and like the kid's the greatest kid, like whatever, you know, I don't want to be that guy. Well, I'll say that the drum teacher had a complete freaking meltdown and basically came out and was like in shock. And it's like the kid is like some kind of I couldn't play a drum set, bro. Dude, no
Same.
possibility. Not even
No.
zero fucking possibility, and not even a slightest chance. And apparently the kid can play drums. So
Brilliant.
we're probably gonna
That's
be doing
awesome.
that a lot. Sounds like.
You're gonna have to get yourself some earmuffs.
Yeah, Jesus. No, he's gonna go to the drumming school and do that, man. Oh, not doing that here. It's
No.
already loud enough around here.
Yeah, Maya just bought a keyboard, didn't you? And
Nice.
him and her and Harrison been having a blast at that. But I'm so useless at anything to do with music. I'm absolutely useless.
I'm good at listening to it.
Tone deaf.
Other
Yeah,
than that,
yeah. I've been to quite a few raves back in the day,
yeah,
but playing any music is no chance, or singing. Just
yeah.
useless.
Not afraid to belt out some karaoke and sync.
Do you know what? I've never done a karaoke in my life because no matter how drunk I am, I know how bad at singing I am, and I just could not do it. I remember being at Jeff Steber's house once, and it was like a intense Christmas party, and I think he had it at his house, and I went round there in the evening. We had some lovely food and stuff, and then Jeff loves his guitars and all that stuff, and he
Yeah.
brought this karaoke machine out. Mate, I nearly had to sneak out and run home because, you know, American people seem to be more up for doing stuff like that, whereas I think not everybody, but I guess I was more reserved at getting on stage and things like that. And mate, when it was coming, Jeff was like, "Everybody's got to do a karaoke," and I'm just thinking, holy shit, what am I going to do? I was like trying to look for exit points and
You turn into Jason Bourne. You're like looking at
yeah. I somehow managed to swerve it. I think he was that drunk at that point. He forgot I hadn't done it. Luckily, and yeah, that
oh,
was
that's amazing.
closest I've ever been to doing a karaoke.
That's so funny.
Anyway,
Uh
um, well, Dave, if I win the Euro Millions, then I'll be coming to you to do that last suggestion I just had.
let's
So
do it, bro.
that would
That would
be
be fun.
cool. But yeah, it's been. I mean, thanks so much for your time. I know you're busy, and you've really answered quite a lot of the questions I've always had. Obviously, I know most of the things you've done, but it's been super cool listening to some of them stories, and just, massive success on, all that you've had so many success stories with all your projects and your brands and everything. It's incredible, really. Like
Yeah.
you've done
I mean,
an amazing job. Like it's bonkers.
yeah, it is kind of crazy. I mean, like, but hey, whatever, hopefully, head down. We're hopefully a lot more to come, we're not going to stop. So, but I
I,
really appreciate you having me on, Nigel. I mean, it's been just awesome talking with you and good to see your face and, you
yeah,
know,
you and again, thank you. And yeah, I look forward to seeing all the new projects coming out. If anybody wants to, find out any of the things that you're doing, how's the best way of doing that?
probably email. I don't really check my Instagram ever. So, apologies to anybody who, by the way, messages me on Instagram because I feel like every time I turn the thing on, I have like 20 messages and I'm like, oh boy, this is going to take a while. Like, I never look.
So,
But yeah, I mean, you can email me at david@dwlink.com. That's my dw-link.com. That's my kind of one of my go-to emails. Like, yeah, always happy to chat. There's a lot
brilliant.
of great people out there, man. It's always awesome just kind of talking with people and hearing kind of what they're about, what they're doing, and kind of
Yeah, it is.
and that's like I said, that's the biggest memories I've had anyways from this whole journey. Really been the people.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I mean, one thing I'd love to do at one point is come over your neck of the woods and go for a bike ride and have a beer. So hopefully we can make that happen at some point, and you can show me some of the cool stuff you're working on, and
Would love
that
to.
that'd be mega, mate.
Yeah,
Uh,
next trip, man. I'm due to go to Wales, although I gotta say, like, I really kind of don't want to ride Diffie with the Athertons,
Neither do I.
but
I've still not been.
I'm kind of due to get out there.
Too scared to go. So if
Yeah, exactly.
you're going, let me know.
All right, I will.
Like where
All
I
right.
live, you'd probably love it here. There's like, I mean, you've done a lot of dirt jumping, but as I get older, I get more scared of the big jumps. And
Oh yeah,
where I live, they're not allowed to build big jumps, but there's some incredible trails and downhill tracks
yeah.
and stuff. It's amazing. So if you're ever over this way, please, or if you're in Wales, I'll drive down, pick you up, and bring you up here if you've got the time. But
Hell yeah.
if you're over, give me a shout for sure.
I absolutely will, my man.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Dave, and good luck with all the projects. And I'm always excited to see all the new stuff you do. And yeah, just thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel, man. Appreciate it so much.
Yeah, no worries. Well, cheers, Dave. Have a good
Cheers.
week, and I'll speak to you soon.
All right, sounds good, buddy. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. See you, mate. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that podcast. I really enjoyed that with Dave Weagle. He's such a talented guy. He's done some amazing stuff in the mountain bike industry with great success, and you can see so many brands getting in touch with Dave when they've got a new bike to make, whether it's a downhill World Cup race bike or a trail bike. So yeah, thanks very much, Dave. Please all like, subscribe, and comment. That really helps us with the podcast. And yeah, thanks for listening, and see you next week. Cheers.